I am currently at Lambert International Airport in St. Louis, and we are getting ready to hop on a plane pretty soon and head to Disneyland. Well, heading to the John Wayne Airport and then traveling from there. And we are going to spend 3 days at Disneyland. We're going to spend 2 days at Disneyland Park, a day at California Adventure, and an extra day at Universal Studios Hollywood to check out Super Nintendo World. Lots more coming up. Can't wait to tell you all about it. It's going to be fun. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, welcome to episode 200 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. Can you believe it? We made it. I am your host, Dan Heaton, and first of all, I just wanted to say thanks so much for listening to this show and being part of this extended project that I am still figuring out what it is. I'm continuing to enjoy it, and I'm excited to bring you this episode. We are not looking back at the past. We are not looking at previous episodes or talking about what I did and why I started, anything like that. We did that on episode 100 if you haven't had a chance to listen to that. Today is an extensive trip report of our recent visit that I took with my family to Disneyland. We also went to Universal Studios Hollywood. That is going to be a separate episode 201 next time. This time is all about our stay at Disneyland. We stayed at the Hyatt House, like I mentioned, for 4 nights. We went to the park for 3 days, 2 days at Disneyland Park, 1 day at Disney California Adventure, caught up on a lot of rides that either I hadn't done before or haven't done in a long time. First time going with my family, which we've gone to Disney World a lot, have not been to Disneyland, so I think that's very cool. I have been there, but it's been a long time. Attractions have been added, attractions have gone away, it's a lot more crowded, so it's changed quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play some clips that I recorded. This is similar to the Walt Disney World trip report that I did last year from our trip in spring break 2022, where I didn't record clips in the park. I recorded the next morning, basically talking about the day before. So there's going to be 3 clips, one each day, talking about the previous day and what we did. And those clips are just a summary. And the idea is to get my immediate thoughts, not to cover everything we did, but to give a summary where I'm still kind of in the middle of the vacation and what we thought and what we hoped to do, and then see how it actually went. And I think those are really fun to, instead of me getting back home and thinking about it when I've had sleep and I can really kind of go, oh, we should have done this or this, just getting my initial reactions. And then after I play those clips, I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about every attraction that we did and what I thought about it, but also give what I hope is some helpful advice from things we learned. Because I know a lot of you have possibly been to Disney World a lot. Maybe you haven't made the trip out to California, or it's been a while since you've been there, or maybe you're going with family for the first time, kind of like me. So I want to talk about what we learned, things that worked really well, some other choices that I wish I could change, some challenges on Disney's side from cast members, but especially from attraction downtime and breaking. Some of that I hadn't experienced at the same scale in Florida, but I know is a problem on both coasts. So we're going to talk about that. So much packed into this episode, so I want to get right to it. We are going to now rewind back to the morning of May 29th, as I was talking about our first day at Disneyland and what we did, play all those clips. Then I'm going to come back now, so much in the future, several weeks in the future, to talk about everything we did beyond that and to also give a lot of added context and info that hopefully will help you to have a great trip on your own. So let's get right to it. Let's dive in to everything about my trip to Disneyland. right. Well, I never actually recorded anything at Disneyland yesterday. It was just really busy, and I don't mean that in a bad way because we did a ton of things. It was just too busy. We were just going from attraction to attraction. And when you're kind of finding a place to sit down, Sunday Memorial Day weekend, to give a little background, a lot of people there, but we had a good time. We did a ton. I'm not going to go through everything. I'm actually recording this outside of our hotel because I was going to record in the lobby, and there are too many people because people are leaving on Memorial Day, which actually makes me think that maybe the park will still be crowded, but maybe not as crowded as yesterday, though today we're going to Disney California Adventure. But to give a quick summary, we're actually staying at the Hyatt House, which is really nice. We have a studio kitchen suite, which is almost like 500 square feet and was less than half the price of Grand Californian or even Disneyland Hotel, which is where I wanted to stay, and where we were set to stay in 2020. But regardless, it's been really nice. And the walk is fine. I would say it's about between 10 and 15 minutes, depending on your speed of walk, which isn't too bad. It's a few blocks. Basically, we're at about the corner of Harbor and Catella on Harbor Boulevard, if you know where that is. Close to like the Residence Inn and a few of the other ones near the convention center. But the walk's manageable. I will say that by the time you're done with a full day at the park, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, what did we do? And, even the first night we were like, oh, we're in. It's like 5. Let's go to Downtown Disney. That was a mistake. Downtown Disney was crazy packed. Trying to eat somewhere on a Saturday night was insane. And then having to walk back was like, oh, this is not a great way to start. But we were able to still have a lot of fun yesterday and use Genie Plus especially effectively, where essentially, if you planned ahead, yes, there were a few things like Indy and Hyperspace Mountain and everything that are way out. But in general, you can get things within, half hour, an hour. There was a time where we were like in Main Street, and we had done Mr. Lincoln, and we're like, oh, we're getting ready to go. We have Star Tours we didn't do because it was down earlier. And we did it we had to wait 10 minutes. And the line was 15 minutes, or we could just wait 10 minutes to go on Genie Plus. And it was probably the same, but then we could wait out of the park. But yeah, so we used it a lot. I will go through all the attractions we did when I get back because it's kind of a whirlwind. And I also don't want to be here for 30 minutes because we are prepping to go to DCA this morning. Though not as early as yesterday. But we arrived about a little after 9. Park opened at 8. We're not early risers. We're not going to be ones that get there right when it opens. But the park is open until 12, and we only stayed till about 7-ish because we were just wiped out. And the weather was great. The weather's been like 70 degrees. It was cloudy all day. One thing I will say, the thing I noted on a negative side, attractions were down constantly. Indy was down most of the day. Rise of Resistance down a lot. We went to do Star Tours and it was down. We went to do Winnie the Pooh and it broke down in the middle. Went to do the Railroad and it was down. Never ended up doing the Railroad or Winnie the Pooh, but we have another day at Disneyland that we are doing on Tuesday, second day. So just to say, the Autopia cars just kept breaking. And it was comical. It was funny because attendants kept having to come out and shake the cars and open the trunk. We had this car in front of us, broke 3 times while we were on it, and then my daughter behind us car broke. So, and those cars are newer than the Florida ones, I think. So it's crazy that happened. But I will say, highlight, got to do Splash Mountain again. Never been that soaked ever on Splash Mountain. I don't know if I haven't done Disneyland as much, and maybe we're used to going January, March and stuff, and they turn down the water, but literally the final drop was fine. The one that goes down and up, we came in and water went over, I was in the front, over my head and landed on it, and I was soaked the rest of the day. Luckily, we did it 4 o'clock, but I was miserable because it was not warm enough. So that was fun. And also, we did Hyperspace Mountain, which was fun. I hadn't done that before. I really like the going up the lift hill with the hyperspace. Some of the other effects are, hit or miss. And the Disneyland Space Mountain, mostly just turns, not a lot of drops. But I do appreciate it. I think the music works really well with the onboard audio. So that was fun. And it does pack a pretty good punch. I always feel like the Disneyland one, because of all the turns, feels more forceful than the Florida one, which has more straightaways and drops. You really feel it because it's a smaller area, but you're turning around a lot. So you really feel that too. We did a lot of the Fantasyland ones, which got to do Snow White's Enchanted Wish. Didn't love that. I think the effects are really nice. I think they really look newer. The ride doesn't look like an old ride. But I admit that I enjoyed Pinocchio and Toad more. But it also, because those are just dark and so weird, where this one's a little upbeat and happier. So it's a little different. So we did that. We did Nemo. I hadn't done that before.
which I really like the early parts of that ride before that's the Finding Nemo story, but then Nemo gets lost, and some of it feels almost exactly the same as Nemo in Florida, so I thought that was interesting. Saw a little bit of Magic Happens, which reminded me a lot of Festival of Fantasy, but did have some cool stuff. Had a Sword in the Stone float, of all things, but some of the floats look really nice. We didn't see all of it, but saw most of it. Did not make it for Wondrous, and of course they're not showing Fantasmic, but also got to do Haunted Mansion, of course, Hatbox Ghost, and everything else. Did quite a bit just spread across the park. Did Jungle Cruise with almost no wait, and that's always fun. A lot of the rides, we timed it right. You would look and all of a sudden say, like, wow, this is only 5 minutes. It's crazy. Oh, did Tiki Room, got a Dole Whip from Tropical Hideaway. It's interesting how that works, where the Dole Whip Tiki Juice Bar just does mobile order, and it was always like they were ordering out like 80 minutes out, which I didn't realize. I guess we could have. But then we just waited in line, Tropical Hideaway with a long line, but it was maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Got some bao there that was very good, and then mango and pineapple swirl. And my wife got a strawberry float that was very good. But did that and went in the Tiki Room. Of course, we were almost done by the time the pre-show was over. Really crowded, the Tiki Room was. But enjoyed that. Of course, seeing the original is always fun with the cool pre-show and everything else. Did not do Indy because it was down all day. But, still need to do Big Thunder. And really what we did is we kind of carved out. We did most of Fantasyland, Tomorrowland, parts of New Orleans Square and Frontierland. Oh, and we spent a lot of time on Tom Sawyer Island, which, you think, well, that's more for little kids, but I have never been to the Pirate's Lair on Tom Sawyer Island. And, remember talking to Chris Runco about that, him working on that with Ray Spencer. And that was very fun to see kind of all the, I love all the nice little touches. The part where you go through the cave is really cool. Some really neat effects. And it was just so much less crowded. And that was great because really, the thing about Disneyland is doing all the attractions is easy. With Genie Plus, even without it, I think you could do it. But with Genie Plus, it's pretty easy. But then doing it, the crowds on the paths are nuts. It was crazy. But really, it's not that much worse than Magic Kingdom in that way. But it's just kind of like Magic Kingdom has those pockets, like Fantasyland and everything. And there's just pockets everywhere. But also we did Mr. Lincoln, which I really enjoyed. My kids kind of fell asleep. But I thought it was cool to do, especially getting away from the crowd. Saw the Disney 100 exhibit. So we did a ton. And I'll go through all of it, like I said, when I get back, but I thought this was a good summary. We're getting ready to go DCA today. Of course, want to do Web Slingers for the first time, Mission Breakout, and then things like Radiator Springs Racers. But I think today's going to be a little more low-key because we still have another day at Disneyland. But I think we're going to hit Avengers Campus for the first time. Was excited to see that, but probably won't be as nutty just because DCA just doesn't have as much. I don't need to do all the carnival rides. Sure, maybe I'll do the Credit Coaster, but Toy Story Mania, everything else. But excited to see that. Haven't been there in a while. And I think it'll be really fun. So hopefully I'll talk to you on this tomorrow. All right, well, I am in the hotel lobby here at the Hyatt House. It is the next morning on Tuesday. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about our day at Disney California Adventure, which was very crowded on Memorial Day. Started out pretty light, but as the day went on, it was like, man, there are a lot of people here. But we had a good time. We did not stay for World of Color 1. I just think that a full day, given how long the parks are open, is just a challenge for us. But we still did a ton. We checked out my first ride on Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, and also my first ride on Web Slingers. Did Radiator Springs Racers, Soarin', all the usual attractions too. But I want to talk about the big new things that we did, which of course is Mission Breakout. And first I have to say the queue line and pre-show and everything else, just awesome. The fact that they flipped that around in such a small amount of time is still kind of amazing. The fact that they did it that quickly, it's crazy to think about how much, as I step outside, as it was getting a little loud in there, how much they put into that in a fairly small amount of time. Joe Rohde and the many Imagineers who worked on that were able to put so many cool effects. Like when you walk in, and we did the lightning lane, and you walk in and you want to just see, I didn't want to spend an hour in line, but the fact that you get to look up and see just like there's even a figment up there and a lot of noticeable kind of Marvel gags and references, plus just some weird stuff like there's like a brain sitting at one point and everything they're studying that the collector's studying. Benicio del Toro is going full on, taking it to 11 in the pre-show and everything else. Very funny as the collector, and just going through. And then of course the pre-show with the really cool Rocket Raccoon animatronic animatronic that stands above you, and because that room is fairly small, I mean, it's the old Rod Serling room, but you look up and see him and he's right there, and that was very nice. I will say the attraction was very forceful. I'm pretty good on, never had any issues on Tower, I think too, because you kind of have that a little bit where you're kind of getting ready for it, and especially in Florida where okay, first we're going to go up, we're going to see the first scene, going through the fifth dimension, and then you go through the drop sequence, where here there's no warning, which I had heard before, but I've never watched a ride video where it shoots you up and down and up and down, and there's a few videos and up and down. I mean, it's super fun, I have to say. I mean, we enjoyed it immensely, but it's like, and then they're like, yeah, you saved it. Oh, you drop it. So it's almost like you feel like Rocket's just messing with you. Totally fits with the Guardians of the Galaxy, but afterwards, it's like, oh, I could feel that more than I would normally feel it. But overall, I think it's a great addition to the park. And actually, the outside of the building, kind of when you see it in the context of the park and with Avengers Campus, everything looks okay. Didn't bother me. I think it's really distinctive. It kind of thought it looked ugly, but it grew on me a lot. And Web Slingers is interesting because I feel like I like a lot of the references again in the, you have like the Moon Girl and Squirrel Girl reference and other people in the queue, and you got Tom Holland doing his Peter Parker and Spider Bots and everything else. Everything's pretty well done. The building doesn't look like much, but I will say the big selling point of this ride is I know you've used it with like Ninjago and some other attractions, but that is using the arms and the web slingers, which is really fun. It's exhausting, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I will say, because a lot of it, the going around a screen, shooting at things, not really know what you're doing, it's very Justice League Battle of Metropolis-like. So, I mean, to me, that's almost the biggest comp to it, in that you're just kind of going through screen, everything else, little sets and stuff, but mostly that, kind of sitting in a box. But the difference between the two, I mean, that one, you got all the superheroes. Here you have Spider-Man, the Spider-Bots, is the ride, the method of shooting. That is the draw, and that is something that's going to keep people going back, because it is kind of cool, and you're like, you don't know what you're doing. I got the highest score in the team, which was like 181,000 of the four of us, my two daughters, and then we had an extra person, because my wife gets motion sickness, which I think was a wise move on that one, even though, I mean, it was not as rough as like Guardians, but just the screens and the way it looks, and you're going up and down and stuff. But fun ride. I think, again, it's very similar to Smuggler's Run, as others have said, where I feel like on its own, very cool ride. But as the anchor for a new land, I know Guardians is there, but to me that's almost like the equivalent of almost like Toy Story Mania. I mean, it's better than that, but I'm just saying in terms of already kind of being there. Oh, I assume some of their plans were that way. But if that land had that third e-ticket, or that e-ticket they're talking about with King Thanos and all that, that'd be awesome. Because I will say, Avengers Campus, there was always something going on. The Spider-Man show was happening, then Black Panther was fighting someone when we walked by, and then another time it was like Captain America's doing something. I mean, there's always all these things going on, and there's characters, Ant-Man and the Wasp. I saw Ant-Man holding the little mini Bugs Land, which is very cute. And so all that was great. It's just Avengers Campus 2, with that music blaring and stuff, when the crowds really pick up, it's not a very inviting place to be. It's like when it was less crowded, I was like, it's pretty nice, I like it. And then the people start coming in, it's like, oh. And actually, Cars Land's a little bit that way, though I know you kind of fits a little more with that, with like the music and everything else. And of course, the Radiator Springs Racers rock work, just incredible. I mean, just, you turn to your right, you turn to your left, everything. It's almost more incredible when you're not on the ride, because when you're on the ride, it's great, but it's so quick. I mean, you do go by the waterfall and everything. And we did pay individual lightning lane for that, because the wait was 90 minutes. It's the only one we've done so far, that we suspect we may do Rides of Resistance if it's not broken, or maybe Mickey and Minnie's, depending on the length of the wait today. But $18 for four of us. So a lot to pay, but it was a 90-minute wait and very long line. Yes, we could have done single rider, but, not having done it a bunch of times, my girls have never done it. So that was worth doing. Beyond that, really loved hanging out in the Pacific Wharf area, which I know is going to be San Francisco. You got the bakery tour there, the Pacific Wharf Cafe. There's also the Chinese food place that we went to. We went back to there several times, especially early in the day when it wasn't super crowded. It's awesome, and I'm looking forward to how they retheme it. I saw a lot of it's already done, but as long as they kind of retain that feel, even if it's shifted for Big Hero 6, I think that's okay. And So I like that area a lot, especially when it's less crowded with all the different food options. Has a nice life to it. There's also the Geo Deli, which we did go in there and order some chocolate. So that's right there next to it. So that's pretty cool. Other things we did, we did Monsters, Inc., which everyone was kind of like, it's fine. Old Superstar Limo, We didn't do some of the things we've done in Florida a lot, like PhilharMagic or Turtle Talk with Crush or anything like that, but did go inside the animation area for a little bit, which was a cool setup. Soarin' was great. I mean, Soarin' around the world, so it's great as far as that goes. I still don't understand why they don't just do around the world at Epcot in California all the time here, not just during the special festivals. But another thing is Grizzly River Run, which I had never done before. But after being completely drenched on Splash Mountain, I was like, I really didn't want to do it. And early in the day, it had no weight. And I was like, I can't do it. But then the sun came out, and it was like 4 PM, or late in the day, and we're like, okay, this is the last ride we're doing. Then we're just going to pick up some stuff and get food, whatever. So we did it. Super fun. I can't get over the idea. The raft ride, same way with Mystic River Falls at Silver City. It's like these people you've never met before, and you find yourself interacting with them because everybody doesn't want to be facing backwards. And whenever it spins, you're like, oh no, not me. And everyone was going to have the right spirit about it. The guy next to me got soaked. My younger daughter, Etta, got soaked. But luckily, I guess because I got soaked on Splash Mountain, this time it was not as bad. I just got a little wet. Seemed like normally I would probably think it was a lot, but given how soaked I was yesterday, I was like, this is nothing. I could do this. But I don't want to tempt fate. I don't think there's anything else. But like when we get to Universal, I don't know if I can do Jurassic World unless it's late in the day, because I just do not want to be drenched. And who knows if we want to eat at City Walk or whatever. I mean, I probably will do it just because to see the animatronic, but after what happened with Splash Mountain, I don't know. But Grizzly River's fun. I mean, after doing Mystic River Falls, it's like the drop's not as big, but there's 2 drops. And the first drop, I almost was like, wait, is this the drop? And I have one more thing on that. We got to the top of the drop, and then they had something that's been very common on this trip. They had to stop the ride. Now, I don't know, this could have been someone that needed to get in, that needed extra accessibility or whatever, but we sat up there with like this barricade blocking us for a good 2 or 3 minutes, maybe more, and everyone was like tense about it. It's like one of those coasters at Busch Gardens where they have a stop at the top of the hill. It was like that. So we were just waiting, and finally they're going to go. It's like, okay. But that was super fun. And so overall, I think we had a good day. I knew this would be a little more laid back just because there weren't as many things. We didn't mess with the carnival rides. No Golden Zephyr, all that. Just mostly focused on the nicer areas. I think the Grizzly Peak area that's been redone looks awesome. I mean, not recently, but was redone a while back. And then Cars Land was cool. Avengers Campus, looked a little better than I expected. I heard it was very warehousey. I think it was a little more than that. And just given the lot, I love the fact that there's so many characters, and even characters that don't really. It's like, why is Black Panther fighting the villain from Black Widow? And not even the villain really, but it gets a little weird. But that's what I love about it. I love that it's so weird and fun and everything. And Star Wars Galaxy's Edge should be that. And we'll likely go there today. I think that's it for now. One more day at Disneyland. And then Universal in a few days. But we got a lot more. We want to hit Galaxy's Edge today. And then a few other rides like Pirates and stuff we haven't done yet. We haven't been to Toontown yet. So it's more like Toontown, Galaxy's Edge, and then a few other things. And I'll be back to tell you more about it later. All right, well, I'm here in the lobby of the Hyatt House. It's a bit loud in here, so I apologize for that. I'm going to talk briefly about our last day at Disneyland, which was super crowded thanks to Splash Mountain's last day. We did not go on Splash Mountain, but I did see that the wait times were up to 250 minutes. May have been higher at times. I didn't check it all the time. But yeah, so it was crazy how many people were there. And not just Splash Mountain. The whole New Orleans Square area was nuts because the line filtered back and then people were just over there hanging out, waiting for Lightning Lane or whatever. So there was a nice excitement to the park because of that. People seemed happy to be there. We just never ventured over there because we had, done Splash Mountain purposely on Sunday. But it was more crowded yesterday than it was Sunday, largely due to the, I think, influx of locals and everyone who all wanted to be there for Splash Mountain's last day. But we did a lot of kind of other attractions that we really enjoyed that we hadn't done before, meaning we didn't do Sunday. Like we started out with a railroad actually and just did the full loop because, we're still a little tired. And I wanted to, of course, see the Grand Canyon and Primeval diorama at the end. But just the whole thing, getting a chance to jump right on at Main Street and ride the whole way. And really like the area with the bridge and the rock work and everything near Star Wars Galaxy's Edge that they added. That's really cool. So I'm glad we got to do that. Later in the day, we also did the Columbia, which is another thing I really like. I know it sounded a bit like an old man here, talking about all the kind of relaxing rides, but you get away from the people. It wasn't super crowded. It's the open air boat that goes around the rivers of America. Glad we got to do that. I really like that. I just like the idea of seeing so much of Disneyland just from a different vantage point, and you're able to just kind of sit there and chill and hang out. And did Pirates of the Caribbean, which had a super long line. Again, all those people that were nearby. But didn't really take that long. It was probably only 20 minutes. But it was up listed at 45. And we lucked out kind of that it moved so quickly and we got on. Pirates is always great. You know, my daughter had a funny statement where I just asked her what she thought. And she was like, that was really long. And I'm which to me, that's what I enjoy so much about that Pirates, is that it's longer. But I think it's funny that her response was that it was long. But yeah, so in terms of other things we did yesterday, we did Galaxy's Edge. We spent a lot of time there. Did single rider on Smuggler's Run, but my daughter and I were both able to ride together because they asked, and that was easy. I mean, there was like no one in line single rider. We were engineers, but still had fun on that. Did Rise of the Resistance, which I found that what I appreciate more the second time was actually the earlier parts, just how much detail is put into, just like you walk through and you see those big ships and the hangar area, like the Poe Dameron ship, and then you get into that transport, and we're standing like 2 feet from the Lieutenant Beck animatronic. There was hardly anyone on the transport, and I was able to really appreciate just how much went into even that, and that experience of acting like you're on the tractor beam and everything else. And then we get on the actual, the line was very long inside the Star Destroyer. So I think they were balancing it out weird in some way. Maybe that's why they were sending such few people. But, and we used individual lightning lane. The wait was listed at 90 minutes. So we did pay for that. $25 a person, but for 3 of us. But did that. And the actual ride, we again had the B mode animatronic of Kylo Ren, so I still have not seen that. But it's good. I mean, I enjoyed it a lot. I still think the detail in there is great. But just the full experience, I think I checked out a lot of the details and just how much work went into it. And enjoyed that more. We did kind of mosey around Galaxy's Edge. I saw Mandalorian and Grogu, saw Boba Fett. Kylo Ren was very funny, walking around, making people forget and trying to find out information, so that was cool. Spent more time in there because Galaxy's Edge was not super crowded because so many people were over by Splash Mountain, so that was really nice. And so we were able to do that and tried the Bounty Hunter game, but it's a little dumb. I mean, because you scan where you need to find, and it's just buzzing constantly. It's almost like you're hot or cold, and then you're just trying to find another symbol, and it's I guess it's cool, but I just got annoyed because the Magic Band just kept buzzing and buzzing and buzzing and buzzing the whole time, and I was like, we're not even trying to do this right now. We're trying to do something else. So yeah, it was not the most exciting thing that I've ever seen at Galaxy's Edge, and I still think the Magic Band Plus are kind of missed opportunity. Even though sometimes it's fun when they light up and something cool happens, but overall it's kind of not that great. We also went into Toontown. We did. We met Mickey in his house. House looks great. Wasn't much of a line there. So did one character greeting, not too many character greetings. We saw a lot of characters and kind of took pictures of them, but didn't spend a lot of time waiting in line for one. But that's also, Disneyland is so good with the characters just everywhere. You're constantly oh, there's Wendy, there's Peter Pan, there's Captain Hook, there's Pinocchio. Constantly in Fantasyland especially, and of course in Avengers Campus. Spider-Man, the guy who played Spider-Man was having a lot of fun high-fiving everyone in Avengers Campus the other day. So that was really fun. Also did Roger Rabbit. Don't love Roger Rabbit. I thought I didn't want to spend much, so you find yourself just kind of trying not to do that. The story doesn't really make sense, but I do like that it feels a little bit like an updated Mr. Toad. I saw the clown that's supposed to look like Joe and Cicero, so that was entertaining. But we did that. That was enjoyable. We did the Storyland boats, which I thought would be a quick one, but then the boats broke. More on that later. And did that. That's cute. I mean, it is what it is. Also did Big Thunder, which was broken most of the day, but did that in the early evening. That one was dark, and that's always fun. Daughter loved Big Thunder, who's 10. Etta, she just loved it. So I'm glad I got to do that. And then we were going to finish the night with Indiana Jones. First thing, saw Tony Baxter inside Indiana Jones from a little ways away. And, of course, he was here for the Splash Mountain final day, along with a lot of other Imagineers and people that worked on it. But we saw him, and then we were almost in the pre-show. We waited through the pre-show, got in the next hallway, and then just the line stopped. And I thought, oh, it's broken. But they weren't telling us anything, and we're just in this hallway for so long. Finally, we get around to like almost the entry point, like where you get on the vehicles, and everybody started cheering. It's like, okay, they fixed it. Oh, to say, Indy was down almost all day Saturday, was down all day yesterday, and then finally came up right before our Lightning Lane we had booked, which was at 7 p.m. So we get up the stairs, down the stairs. We're literally like a car vehicle or two from getting on, and then it breaks again. And then again, no one telling us anything. People are sitting in the car, and nothing's happening. Finally, I go ask somebody, so what's the deal? They're like, can we just leave? Because this was the last ride of the night. We didn't care about getting an extra fast pass or whatever. They're like, wait 5 minutes, and we're either going to go or we're going to send everybody out the queue. Wait 5 minutes, they send everybody out of the queue. So we were in there for an hour and 20 minutes with a lightning lane, mind you. Never heard why or what was happening or anything. And I'll talk more about this when I get back, but we still had a great time at Disneyland. Still tons of things to do, all that. But the attraction downtime there is a serious issue. And the fact that and I don't blame the employees, because I'm sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. But the fact that we just never knew what was happening, it gets old really quickly and is not great. So they got some work to do there. And I know I've heard this from others, and I didn't expect it to be that bad. But yesterday, I mean, you looked at one point, it was like Mickey and Minnie's down, Rise of Resistance is down, stuff like Alice in Wonderland was down, Big Thunder, Indiana Jones, so many things were down. And also, but it's not as much them being down, it's also when you get in line. There were people that said it happened 5 times today where they got in line and had to leave somewhere. That's just bad show. I mean, and Indiana Jones just went to have this big refurb, and now they can't even keep it going. And I know it's a complicated ride. But yeah, it wasn't a great way to end the night, but we came out of it. We were still in good spirits. We were just happy to get out of that queue. And even though my girls had never done Indiana Jones, I really wanted them to ride it. At some point, we were just like, let's get out of here. Let's go. But overall, I think we had a good trip. We did a ton. Disneyland, as always, very charming despite the crowds. Still got one more place to go. Today's kind of our in-between day. Going to try and relax a little more, maybe see a beach, and then eventually end up at our other hotel to get set for one more park.
Welcome back. Well, I have a lot to talk about from our trip. I am going to go through all the attractions we did each day, focusing in especially on ones that I found interesting, and then talking about, I'm not going to mention every type of food we had. I didn't keep track of all that, but I am going to talk about in general things like accommodations, food we had, and of course, Disney Genie Plus. And I will say overall, we're approaching this. My daughters are 14 and 10. And they, while interested in seeing them, didn't have a lot of interest in characters and seemed to, especially my 10-year-old, was more focused on thrill rides, while my 14-year-old was focused more on Star Wars and Marvel and things she found interesting in that regard. And then just some random things, like she wanted to go on Tom Sawyer Island, Pirate's Lair, the bread tour, just some interesting elements that we ended up doing partially because, she just got interested in some different odd stuff. So we kind of had to balance all that out. And also they did get worn out with just the full day after flying and everything else. So we didn't end up staying super late. But just in general, I think a lot of it worked out well. So when I was approaching this trip, just in terms of the ticket, I originally thought maybe 4 days. 4 days seemed like we had enough time where we could do what we wanted and just see everything, possibly park hop, and then we'd spend a day or two just looking around California. And what changed it was one of my daughters has gotten really into Nintendo, especially playing Nintendo Switch and a lot of the characters and Mario and, all the Mario characters, Daisy, Peach, everyone. And so it became clear that she would really get something out of going to Super Nintendo World and Universal Hollywood. Rather than just going to Disneyland, we would split it up. And I'm still not sure if that was the right move. Not because of anything with Universal, just because of splitting it up. It kind of shifted the trip in an interesting way. And part of me thinks maybe it could have been 2 different trips. But again, I don't know when we're going to be going back. But then my next thought was, why not stay on site? And the reason being just, we haven't been to Disneyland as a family before. Let's splurge a bit. Let's stay there. We actually had planned to do this. We had a trip planned where we were not going to go to Universal, but we had a 4-day park hopper, 5 nights. We were going to stay at the Grand Californian, and then we were going to have several days doing other things in California. I never even got to the point where I was getting set to book the other hotel when COVID hit in March. This was going to be similar, like late May, early June 2020. But we already had booked 5 nights at Grand Californian, and the price was not cheap, but it was much less than it was going to be this time. I forget the exact amount, but it was like $500 or a little over that, which with discounts and everything, still a lot of money per night. But I thought, okay, we'll splurge. We'll do this. This was in 2020. And then now it would have been like $800 or $900 with discounts. And Disneyland hotels, same way, with very little availability. Even Paradise Pier was going to be as much basically as we were going to pay for Grand Californian. And it never went down. I checked it over and over. And I just got to a point where I was like, I cannot justify, especially when it's just a room. It's not even a villa or condo, spending that kind of money for almost any hotel, but especially not for this. So then I started looking at the off-site hotels, and I consider that already because Disneyland's so convenient that you can walk to the park from so many different hotels, and both parks are right there, that it made sense to do that. So I started looking at the ones that were super close, like several Best Westerns, but then we decided that there's a trade-off where you can essentially have bigger rooms with nicer amenities and a 10, 15-minute walk, or you can stay across the street. And really the pricing was very similar for like those Best Western types that were across the street. They were smaller. Nothing against those. I've heard they're very nice. My brother recently stayed in one of them. But those were a certain price. And then we ended up choosing, I was looking kind of at the Residence Inn, also looked at the Courtyard by Marriott, which was closer, ended up choosing the Hyatt House. And one of the reasons it was rated very highly by Tom Bricker of the Disney Tourist blog, also in the unofficial guide, it got 4.5 stars for quality. And so I looked at it and I went, okay. And plus the price was basically before fees was like less than $300, which you say, well, that's still a lot for a hotel in that area. For Memorial Day weekend, it was not that much. I will say a lot of the other ones were more. But if you compare that to Grand California, it was like almost a third. It was with fees, it was slightly more than a third, maybe like 40% of the price of Grand Californian. And I'm like, okay, I can't justify this. Another thing too is that was to get like a suite where essentially it was like a 500 square foot suite with a kitchen. And we weren't going to do a lot of cooking, but having a small fridge where you like get pizza or whatever, you can put it in there, having a microwave, having dishes. Oh, dishes are wonderful in a hotel room. I will say a dishwasher, all that really makes a difference. And not that we were treating it like, it's not like we're at a beach villa, we're going to stay there the whole time. But then also having a big couch. You had this interesting with the TV where it could turn either direction back to the 2 queen beds or to the couch. But just having space really was nice. And when I get further onto the Universal, on the next episode, I'll talk more about our hotel there, which was a nice hotel also, but the square footage was more in line with, a smaller room, where having this extra space was nice. And I'll just say overall, I found the Hyatt House to be a good choice. A couple things I wanted to note. One is it's about, I would say 10, 12 minutes to walk, but the real killer is you do have to cross the very busy intersection of Harbor and Catella, because you're essentially on one corner, and in order to go to Disneyland, you ultimately are going to have to cross twice. You're going to have to cross Catella and then cross Harbor to get to that side. And so these are busy streets. It's not like it's impossible to cross, but you have to do it each time. If we didn't have to do that, it would be much shorter. It would be easier. So that extra bit was kind of a bit much. However, it's not that big of a deal. It's not like one of those where you can't cross. There's tons of people crossing every time. They have long walk signals. Very easy to cross in that regard. That wasn't great. It would have been nice if it was just a little closer. I know I can't pick up the hotel and move it, but in general, I found the walk wasn't bad. My daughters, especially my 14-year-old, didn't love it, complained. But, if you really think about it, though, when we were at Disney World last year, we walked from the Swan to Epcot, and we also walked from the Swan to the Hollywood Studios. This was comparable, I think, to walking. I mean, it wasn't as nice because you're on the street, but walking from the Swan to Epcot. Walking from the Swan to Hollywood Studios was a bit longer than this. But again, those are in kind of these wide lanes and you're looking at the water and you got the boardwalk. And so this felt a little longer because you're just on the side of Harbor Boulevard, but it really wasn't that bad at all. I could highly recommend it. If you're planning to stay and you don't mind the walk, then I think it would work out well. And I guess technically you could get like an Uber or something, but I don't think it's worth it from that distance. If you're choosing it, it's going to be that way. Another thing about it, they had a breakfast for free, which those can be very hit or miss. This one's pretty good. I wouldn't say the food was superb, but compared to like a Holiday Express that I've eaten at or others that I've had breakfast from, this was better than that. And they had more options and they have a really big area. So even though there'd be a lot of people eating, you tended to have room to spread out as long as you weren't picking the busiest time. They had eggs, sausage, potatoes, usually either like pancakes or waffles or French toast. They had some fruit. They had a few cereals, bagels, English muffin, everything else, and plus coffee, orange juice, all that. So, and I thought the service was very good. There was one point where I set down my plate and coffee and went to get a banana and came back and they had taken the dishes. But that's a good sign because I've seen some of these where the service is not so good, where basically it's just like the food constantly is running out. We had this experience both going down and back to Walt Disney World driving to Florida. Granted, we weren't like that was just in Georgia at a random Holiday Express and then in Tennessee, but still, this is important. It makes a big difference knowing that we didn't have to pay for breakfast, which can add up quickly if you don't have that. And you can always bring snacks and everything else. There is a Walgreens right next to the Hyatt House. So if you need anything, there was one point I needed to go pick up something and it was very convenient. It's open 24 hours. And then across the block, there is a CVS. So if you don't like Walgreens or if you're a member of like, their rewards program or anything else, they're both right there. Another thing to note, there's a Starbucks in the same building. You basically go out the door, it's not actually in the lobby. You go out, walk to the next door basically, and it's its own Starbucks. But and they don't allow you to mobile order because I think they expect to just be mobbed with people. But I went in there was never a very long line. It was a pretty quick thing. Another thing that we used a lot was Blaze Pizza. I had never actually been to Blaze Pizza, even though there's one in St. Louis, and I know people rave about it even in Florida. But the Blaze Pizza, very, very helpful. After the first night, which I'll talk about in a minute, we realized that Downtown Disney wasn't going to work. We didn't really want to stay in the park just to eat late. So we picked up Blaze Pizza twice, both in the evening. And it was open till midnight. And you could order it on the app, so it wasn't like the Starbucks situation. Go down and pick it up. Very nice. And their food was good. And yes, maybe it was a little pricier than in your local town from Blaze Pizza, but compared to Downtown Disney, it was much cheaper to do it this way. Plus, with our room, with having plates, with having utensils and a fridge where we could eat the next day and, paper towels and everything else, getting food like that works out very well in the Hyatt House itself. Also, in terms of the ticket, I looked at it and decided that park hopping, while convenient with having the two parks right next to each other, quite pricey. I mean, Disney has really bumped it up where it was a lot. I even looked in, to add park hopping. I mean, you're talking several $100s easy, if not more. So I just decided, let's do 3 days. Once we decided we were doing Universal, we decided not to do 4 days. Let's do 3 days, and then let's just do 2 days at Disneyland, 1 at DCA. At Walt Disney World, our family has never done very well with park hopping because they get tired and we're not really one to take a break because we rarely are that close. I mean, sure, something like the Swan, but even that is a fairly walk back and forth. This, with the Hyatt, you wouldn't really take a midday break. That would probably only happen if you were staying on site or really close. So in this case, we thought, hey, we're going to do Disneyland, then DCA, then Disneyland. We essentially did that. We went to Disneyland Sunday, DCA Monday, which was Memorial Day, and then Disneyland again on Tuesday, then had a day in between, and then Universal. So in hindsight, sure, I always would like, you could give me 4 days and I'd say, what about a fifth day? I always want more time at Disneyland, but I feel like having the 2 days at Disneyland was huge. And really, the DCA, we easily could have spent the rest of the evening there. There were just some things we didn't do, like your Goofy Sky School or whatnot. We ended up going to the pool at the hotel. One more thing with the Hyatt House, it does have a okay outdoor pool. Second floor, hot tub pool. It was very cold. Temperature was in the 60s, so but still Etta did want to go, so we went to the pool, and I was too cold. It was brutal, but she did swim in it. Nothing particularly outstanding about it. Nothing, not a lot of charm or anything. Your typical kind of corporate pool, but it wasn't like the smallest pool I've ever seen at a hotel. So if the pool matters, check that box. It's not something that you're going to come home and say, "Wow, that was an amazing pool," but I think it was fine. And they also have a fitness center right by there that's fairly sizable too. If that interests you, though, from my perspective, not a lot of people were using it, I will say. So we had a 3-day pass, and we're able to do a lot, but I will say overall, in terms of crowds, it was very crowded. Now, I don't have a lot to compare it to because the last time I went to Disneyland, even then, was a different era for crowds. Now, I know that most days are pretty crowded. So Sunday, I was like, wow, there are a lot of people here. This is a weekend of Memorial Day weekend. Okay. And then Memorial Day was crowded at DCA, lots more people. And then it seemed like Tuesday at Disneyland was even more. And that coincided with the last day of Splash Mountain, which I think, like I mentioned in the clip, really did it. But I would say the lines, though, with the exception of like your Splash Mountain and something, were mostly manageable. And a big reason for that was Disney Genie Plus. If we had to wait just in every line without any assistance, we purchased Disney Genie Plus as part of our ticket. So it was $25 a person buy in advance. I appreciate that a lot because I feel like the way Disney World does it with having to buy the night before is just not good. And I know that allows them to charge more, but just put it like Disneyland. Put it at $25 or something high. Most people are just going to pay for it. If they want it, we'll buy it in advance. You get that money early, and then I don't have to think about it because that was a big thing for me. Less exciting for me was the fact that Disneyland, despite putting in the Magic Band technology, does not allow you to use the quote-unquote dumb Magic Bands, the ones that are not Magic Band Plus. So those don't work. You can't even just use those for tickets or for lightning lanes. Also can't use Apple Watch, which is another thing. My wife used that. Now I have an Apple Watch. I was thinking we'll both use it. Doesn't work. They don't have that set up. That's unfortunate. One thing they do is they have the setup with the phone where you can easily kind of scan it and shift things around. I quickly decided about a month out, I said, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to have to get the phone out with 4 of us. If it was just me, sure, I'll do that. But with 4 of us, I don't want to do that. So we spent the money on Magic Band Plus. And this was posed mainly just for convenience, for getting into the park, and especially for Lightning Lane, since we had Genie Plus. Bought the cheapest ones, which were still like $35 each. And they were just solid color, Magic Band Plus. We got a couple black, gray, blue. My girls thought this was fun to have, but weren't like over the moon over it. And I will say my experience is not great. One, the charge runs out way too fast. So you have basically 4 Magic Band Pluses, 4 chargers. You're charging them in your room. That is not convenient. And granted, even without a charge, they still will work on Lightning Lane and the entrance. I have to be clear on that. It's fun to have them light up, especially when you're going as a family. So we did want to keep them charged. We also thought about the Bounty Hunters game and maybe doing that. We tried to interact with the statues, never got that to work. But whenever you scanned a Lightning Lane, it did light up and go, da, 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 and it would buzz and everything. And that was kind of fun. I really enjoyed, too, the few, Spider-Man with the colors of Spider-Man showed up, or Haunted Mansion where it was all red and you're coming out. There's some nice things like that. But it didn't add, it was one of those, oh, that's nice. That's kind of cute. But I wouldn't say it added a ton to our trip. And we were not there for the nighttime shows, so I can't say how they actually interacted. And then the Bounty Hunters game was something that we were interested in because, again, Elise is really into Star Wars, and she enjoys just doing the Play Disney Parks app and going and making different things light up and was scanning it and all that. App was a little glitchy, though. She wasn't happy because she couldn't seem to get the app to stay up, and especially the data pad. I wasn't having a problem, I think, because her phone service is not as strong as ours. That might be it. So if you have kind of, Mint Mobile, Consumer Cellular, or something that maybe isn't as strong, it might not work as well, and her phone's a bit older. But just overall, I found the Bounty Hunter thing to be pretty stupid. I gotta say, going up, you scan this wall, this device, and then you're able to kind of go around and try and find something. And all I thought was this thing just keeps buzzing constantly. It's too bright out. I can't see if it's saying I'm green or I'm red. And we quickly were just like, yeah, we don't want to do that. I mean, we did, I went with Elise on Smuggler's Run, and then Etta and Erin, my wife, did take my magic band actually, because we were doing and do it, and went to found one, and it was just another symbol, and they were just like, well, that's kind of pointless. So Disney, if you're going to make us purchase Magic Band Plus to get what we want, you need to find a way to make them more valuable in some fashion. I'm not sure what that is, but right now, the way it's been using it feels like a cash grab. We'll get to the Universal one. We'll get more on cash grabs. But I will say for this one, it didn't feel great to spend that extra money. I did, but I mean, in hindsight, I might have just dealt with it with a phone, given that, you don't really do that many lightning lanes in a day. I thought it was something fun to try. Now we have them. We could use them in Florida or back in California in the future. So that's good, I guess. Of course, we got to charge them all, and that's not so fun. So I would say, if you're really into a certain design for Magic Band Plus, go for it. I would say, buy it. It's more as like something cool, like fashion or some style aspect. But if you're just doing it thinking you're going to get something out of it with the lighting up, and even with the Bounty Hunters game, save your money and spend it elsewhere. That's my thought. It's not a complete failure. They worked. They charged. There was nothing bad about it. I would just give it very mixed is how I feel about it overall. Briefly also wanted to mention the weather we experienced if you're thinking of going this time of year in the future. And it can vary every year. The average high temperature around this time is typically in the low to mid 70s and sunny. And that's the way it kind of looked, but we actually ended up having a bit chillier weather, which for the most part was good. Our highs were typically at the most about 70, sometimes 67, 66, lows in the 50s. But it's good because, you could wear shorts, you could wear a jacket, you could wear pants, almost anything you wanted would fit pretty well for the day. And it could be a little chilly. So if you're thinking Southern California, not going to get chilly, this time of year, you may want to bring a jacket. And we're used to going to Disney the last few times we've gone spring break, for example, like last year, where it was pretty warm. It was in the high 80s with a lot of humidity. So this was very different. Obviously, Florida, Southern California, very different climates. But at least for late May, early June, I think the odds are good that at most you're going to have, as we were leaving, it was getting into maybe the mid 70s, but was still chilly in the morning. Now, if you're looking to go on a trip where you spend a lot of time at the pool or even go to the Pacific Ocean, to the beach, which in general tends to be colder, I don't know, you could end up being disappointed. For us, it worked out fine. We had a few evenings for both hotels where we went to the pool a little bit, but it was cold. I mean, even, the pools might have been a bit heated, but still chilly. But to me, I think it worked out great because when you're dealing with all these crowds and everything else, the last thing you want is to also just be so warm. And that's where I think we're seeing with Disney World this summer, where their bookings are soft, partially just due to kind of we're through the revenge travel idea. And I think some people may be concerned with inflation and a recession. And also, though, just the heat getting warmer every year, where in the summers people go to Walt Disney World and they're like, this is so warm. Yes, maybe it's less crowded, but this may be nice for you if you're not someone that really wants it to be super warm, or you're thinking of it in terms of like, this is my summer trip and I want to do that. The only downside too is, though, if you do water rides, you may be very cold, or they may not even open the water rides like at Universal. So that may impact it too, where you could be thinking, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to ride Splash Mountain, Grizzly River Run, everything to get wet. Oh, well, just be careful with that side of it. But overall, the weather worked out great for us. Also want to talk about our arrival, where we flew into John Wayne / Santa Ana Airport. There was a nonstop, not that many, but there was a nonstop offering from St. Louis there through Southwest Airlines. We still had our credits from the 2020 trip. And actually, at that point, we had gotten a pretty good deal. And I was worried that we would be able to find the same sort of deal, just given that airline fees have seemed to have gone up. But I got it where we were paying $18 per ticket. That was the difference between our credit, which no longer, credits don't expire anymore. So thankfully they made that change, so we didn't lose anything and we didn't have to rush our trip. But so essentially just nearly flat. We flew into John Wayne, Santa Ana, Small airport worked out great. It is the closest airport to Disneyland, closer than LAX, closer than Long Beach, though that also isn't that far away. And many consider it, to me, this was perfect because we landed. I think we were one of the only flights that was getting luggage at the time. So we went right over and our luggage showed up maybe in 15, 20 minutes. It took a lot longer on the way home at St. Louis and Lambert Airport, but everything was convenient. The flight was just shy of 4 hours. Nonstop flight, like I said, from St. Louis to Santa Ana. Generally, the consensus is the best way to get from, if you're not renting a car, from John Wayne to your hotel is Uber or Lyft. And we consider that because I think it is the cheapest option too and pretty convenient. And I think it wouldn't have been that imposing after now being at the airport. I would think I'd be more comfortable, and I would have been more comfortable even as myself or even just myself and my wife with our family and with suitcases and everything else. I also looked into shared shuttles, but I really don't like the idea of arriving. This happened to me even last time I went to Disneyland. Super Shuttle was still there at LAX where they just kept circling and then I was squished with other people. So our thought finally was like, okay, we know a shared shuttle would have been like $70 and Uber and Lyft might have been cheaper, but we ended up spending a bit more, not a crazy amount, but a bit more, a little over $100. We just did private transportation, which I've never really done except for a work thing where they said you had to. We booked from a company called Sunny's Transportation. I think it's a very small company. Sanjay, the person who contacted me when I booked it to let me know what it would be and everything, or I asked for a quote and then he contacted me. It was also my driver. So if that gives you the idea of the size, it came in kind of a large, it was an SUV, but it almost felt more like, suburban level. I mean, it was big, so we all fit comfortably in it. Friendly guy, pretty quiet. Just, he texted when we got there. I let him know we had our bags. He pulled up. We got in, took us right to it. There wasn't that much traffic. The transport maybe took not even 30 minutes. And before I knew it, we were there. And it was basically like, I want to say an hour at most, probably less than an hour from when our flight landed to when we got to our hotel. Now, granted, we may have just been really lucky because there wasn't that much traffic. It was a Saturday, but it worked out great. If you are willing to spend extra, and I don't mean this like, oh, we're being so splurgy, but if you're just not really, if you're not a big person with Uber and Lyft, even their higher levels, and you just decide, hey, we're just going to get a private car. It's going to be, guaranteed. I don't have to worry about surge pricing. Not going to worry about who's available. I think this is a great way to go. And in the large scheme of things, it's more, but it's not like so much more where you feel like you're breaking the bank. Yeah, it was a bit of a splurge for us, if like a few things like Magic Band Plus and other things. But just in general, I felt like I could easily make it up by being a little smarter with some of our food choices in other areas. And we weren't going to, you can't really, with how much everything costs, it's hard to stick to a tight budget here. But obviously, a lot of you are going to be renting a car, so this is a moot point. But if you're not looking to rent a car, as we weren't at the start, this worked out great for us. And I should also mention, I'll talk about it more on the Universal episode, as this will be after Universal, but we flew back out of Long Beach because for nonstop and that day and the price and everything, it just worked best. Plus, we were going to have a car at that point. And I will say, John Wayne's a small airport. Long Beach is a really small airport. But it's just something to know. Again, pretty convenient, pretty easy. If you're not, I would try to avoid LAX. In both examples, I feel like we made the right move in that regard. Obviously, it's going to depend on your specific flights. In my particular case, it was actually more expensive to fly into LAX, and the options weren't that great. So we just really lucked out with the days. But different days had much higher prices or possibly not nonstop to those airports, so it's still fairly rare. But both flights worked out great. We're almost basically an hour in, and it's time to dig into the big part of it, which is Disneyland itself. I've talked a lot about logistics. I wanted to make sure that I gave you a lot of background in case you decide that you want to go to the park. But I also want to talk about the parks themselves, and I'm going to go through each day. Before that, I do want to talk about Genie Plus because it's very different at Disneyland. First of all, you don't have to wake up at 7 a.m. Actually, it doesn't do you any good because you can't book until you're inside the park itself. Now, I didn't test that to see, can I book, when I've scanned, I'm assuming it's scanned in, but if you scan in, can I leave the park or whatever? I'm sure you probably can. I haven't done all that. I think the biggest thing is you're scanning into the park before you're booking. Next thing is you are still able to add it to tickets in advance, which I would recommend. It's just easier. And sure, if you decide, hey, I don't want to use it every day, maybe it's a better move. Some days I saw it was 25, some days it was 30. It definitely wasn't cheaper than $25 per day on any of them. So if you're planning on using them for all the days, it's just nice to book in advance and consider it like it's part of the cost of the ticket. Another aspect is PhotoPass is included with Genie Plus, not just the PhotoPass ride pictures, but all PhotoPass, like the full-on one, is included with Genie Plus. Of course, we didn't really get a lot of pictures with PhotoPass because, again, it comes from traveling with kids that just were not that interested in that side of it. A lot of times was like, oh, we should go take a picture there. And like, oh, no. And it was crowded. So we didn't make that much use of it. We did meet Mickey and we did at first I didn't realize another thing to note with Florida, with your Magic Band and the way the RFID works, I found that ride photos would automatically show up in your account. I never thought about, or you go scan it. This is a bit different. The big thing here, which I did not discover the first day, so we missed a few, is the code. So if you have a ride that has a ride photo, go up and see what your code is. Take a picture of it is probably the easiest way to do it, so you don't have to be standing there typing in the code. Then you type it into the PhotoPass on the app, and then it'll show up. I did not find any that showed up automatically. And when we met Mickey, I had the cast member scan my Magic Band Plus, which also did it. But I would keep an eye out for those. Don't assume then that it's going to read that you were there, like has been the case for me in the past when we had Memory Maker with, it was FastPass Plus at the time. But it didn't work out in the same way, at least from my experience. We didn't use PhotoPass much, but I know you could, and it would be a very good value. It was just based, not on me, but on the entire family and kind of what people wanted to do and wait for, because even most pictures, you would have a bit of a line, but even if there wasn't one, this is what happens when the kids get a little older. You deal with things where I was like, oh, I would do X. And mostly, I don't want to overstate it. Mostly, they are accommodating, and they were interested in doing most of the attraction I wanted to do. And I always like to take their input on what they want to do. But some things I would have enjoyed meeting more characters and getting a few pictures, even in front of different landmarks. But instead, there's a lot of pictures of like just one of us or two of the kids or one of us with one of them or whatnot. But really, in the long run, it's a very small thing. Genie Plus itself works much better at Disneyland. Everything I had heard indicated that, and it's totally correct. There were rarely times when an attraction would be out of Genie Plus reservations. And even those that are really popular, which would jump early in the day, you would find pretty late in the day would still have something for 10 p.m. or 11. Sure, there are a few that would not be completely, but if you wanted to ride something, it was a priority, you could do it. You were not going to have a situation where, it was 7:02, everything was gone, or, anything. There's nothing on that scale. Because a lot of people don't get to the park as early. By the time you get there, even on our second Disneyland day, we didn't get into the park till after 10, and I still was able to book for Indiana Jones. Now, granted, that was much later in the day than I would have liked. In general, most things we booked on Genie Plus were available in the next hour or two, even some of the more popular attractions, and even more so, the individual lightning lanes, which you don't need Genie Plus for that. You can obviously book, would often be almost immediately after. Like if they were more than 30 minutes to an hour after the time, that was rare. Most of those times, like we did book Rise of the Resistance and we had to book it maybe an hour and a half after, but we booked it at like 2 and it was available at 3:30. And Radiator Springs Racers we booked and immediately basically got on. So it's much easier. Also, you can add in things like the individual lightning lanes to do that too. And Genie Plus, there are plenty of attractions that would be available almost immediately. We didn't even use. Or you have like Small World, which was available right after, or Buzz Lightyear. We ended up walking on that, and I figured we might use it later, and we didn't. But because that was the first attraction we did on the first day. Star Tours is another one that's available nearly immediately. Haunted Mansion, a little bit out. Big Thunder, a little bit out, but not nearly on the level you might see at Walt Disney World. The most popular attractions for Genie Plus at Disneyland Park were Indiana Jones and Hyperspace Mountain. I suspect that when Space Mountain goes back to its normal self, it might slightly pull back, and then it's definitely Indiana Jones. But in a lot of cases, you just did not see the same level. Roger Rabbit, same sort of thing, an hour or two out, not a big deal. So there aren't all the attractions, though, that you might expect to be on Genie Plus or not. A primary example of this is Pirates of the Caribbean, which you would think would be under Genie Plus, but it's not. So in that case, some of the waits might be 20 to 30 minutes. There's others like Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan's Flight. Those are popular rides in Fantasyland, but they're not included on Genie Plus. But then you have the other side of it where you have something like Autopia, which is on there, which I found in general would be very easy to get. Now, I will say something. There are certain attractions where it's really confusing. Autopia is the primary example. It's really confusing to feel like, where am I supposed to stand? Because the lines just kind of merge together and the cast members don't know what to tell you. And I found myself, you're walking and they're like, just go to the front where it says Lightning Lane, but then other people are waiting in line and it's kind of confusing. So there are a few cases, just with Disneyland being an older park and not having as much space, you do have situations where it gets very confusing about where you're supposed to stand. That was also the case. We did not really use single rider, but that was also the case for some single rider. Where you look at it and you go like, what? What is that? Like, where do I go? In general. And it's not that there's anything particularly flawed at Disneyland. It's just that some of the lines are tight and it's a little hard to figure out where you're going. But just in general, I think if you're going to Disneyland for a fairly small number of days and you haven't gone much, like a lot of people would say, oh, is it really worth it? Because there's a lot you can do without Lightning Lane and Genie Plus. I would say it is worth it. But it's interesting to note, if I look at the Genie Plus attractions first at Disneyland Park, we used it for Autopia, Big Thunder Mountain. This is over 2 days. We did not use it for Buzz Lightyear because we walked on. Haunted Mansion used it. Indiana Jones we would have if it hadn't broken. Used it for It's a Small World, but we saved us for time. Matterhorn was closed. Millennium Falcon, we actually did single rider because it would have been a little while and we were standing right there. Used it for Roger Rabbit, used it for Space Mountain, used it for Star Tours. So you think about how many we used it for at Disneyland. I mean, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11. There's only 11 attractions, and for us, there were only 10 available, and we used it for most of those. And then we also did individual Lightning Lane, nothing to do with Genie Plus, but we did that for Disneyland. Now, at California Adventure, there's even fewer attractions, so you're not getting as much. We used it for Grizzly River Run, Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, Monsters, Inc., Soarin' Over California, and Web Slingers. And the only reason we didn't use it for Toy Story Mania or Credit Coaster is just we kind of got worn out that day and just did not, and then Goofy Sky School. But the thing, if you think about it, those are most of the attractions that have lines. So yes, at California Adventure, the list, they only have it for 8 attractions, but those are most of the big attractions with lines. And then there's Radiator Springs Racers where we did pay for individual Lightning Lane. So I feel like we got a good value out of it. And I also thought it was more convenient to use it that way because even though we didn't use it for every single Genie Plus attraction, we used it for enough where I felt like even using it for 5 at DCA, and easily we could have used it for more. If we had stayed till close, we would have used it for Credit Coaster for myself possibly only, but then Toy Story Mania and Goofy Sky School, we just got wiped out. And that does happen in crowded days and everything, but we easily could have used it for all those too. And it would have been even more valuable. But with Web Slingers, we saved an hour. Similar Mission Breakout was near an hour. And then others were 30 minutes, 40 minutes. A lot of the attractions, even when you're using Genie Plus, might be, they're 20 or 30 or 40 minutes because there's just so many attractions. I also want to mention that the Lightning Lane, similar to Florida, but I even noticed it more here, those lines were often still very long. Like Web Slingers, there was a huge line back there. So we still waited 15, 20 minutes, but they prioritized it. The worst being something like Indiana Jones because it had been closed all day. And Big Thunder had been closed all day when we used it for that. So you still wait. You're saving time. But let's say the queue is at 60 minutes and you do Lightning Lane, maybe you do it in 15. But who's to say, how long other people waited because they realized they have this giant backup at their Lightning Lane and they have to adjust it. Very few of them were quick walk-ons. There was always kind of some sort of delay. The ones that seemed to be the quickest were Rise of the Resistance and Radiator Springs Racers in terms of that or, something that didn't have a long line anyway, like a Star Tours where you just get to the merge point and then you're basically in the same boat. You are going to have those backups, people into the path, and even kind of the best case scenario, Lightning Lane entrances still 10 minutes, something like that. So if you see a standby that's 15, I'm not even sure it's worth using, or 20 maybe even. Really save it or use it for when the lines are much longer. Or the best example of waiting a long time, Hyperspace Mountain, we still waited 20, 25 minutes, but the standby wait was 90. So you almost got to say it's not an immediate. Lightning Lane implies an immediate ride. Similar to Florida, there are oftentimes kind of the luck of the draw where you're going to wait somewhat still, even with those types of crowds. But I would say, unlike Magic Band Plus, I think Disney Genie Plus, yes, it's a little annoying, but I was going to pay for Max Pass back in 2020, and I think fewer people used it. It was less ingrained, so I think in a way it would have been even more helpful. But here I find that Lightning Lane works as designed as well as it can. Not perfect, could be better, but just overall, we had a few cases where Big Thunder shut down, and so then what I did is we got an anytime one. Can't use it on everything, but use it on most. I went over, we did Roger Rabbit because that was going to be later, and then I just booked Big Thunder for later, hoping it would be available, and it was. So that worked out very well. And when Indy broke, we could have scanned for an anytime pass on the way out, but we were leaving. But they set that up where everyone, in a strange way though, because we didn't actually, the ride had been open and we scanned in, you had to scan on the way out. It wouldn't automatically give you something like the others. If you never scanned in, it would give you something right away. So on our first night, we arrived, like I said, it was about maybe 4:40, 5 o'clock, whatever. Got to our room quickly, checked in, and we were all really hungry. And so our thought was, well, it's only a short walk. Let's kind of get right into the Disney in a way and go to downtown Disney. I should remind you, this is the Saturday night of Memorial Day weekend. This was a mistake, especially with what we did, because my thoughts were either we could eat Earl of Sandwich, or there are several sit-down places, one being Shakes and Burgers. There was also a sit-down place called like Naples Pizzeria, which seemed nice, looked a lot like Via Napoli. And then there was a quick service place called Napolini. And so my thought was kind of like, well, Earl of Sandwich is right there. That's nearby. Let's go into downtown Disney. They probably want to see downtown Disney anyway. And after a flight and everything else, and plus we had done some things in town in St. Louis in the morning we had to go to, it was too much. There were just so many people, and it was almost overwhelming. We tried to go to Naples, and the line was out the door. Same with the other sit-down places. We ultimately were just like, we should just get this quick service pizza at Napolini. And service there was quick, but then there was nowhere to sit, nowhere to eat, because they don't have very many tables there. So we ended up sitting on kind of a curbside, eating out of a pizza box. And that meal, 4 of us each getting pizzas with drinks, not alcoholic drinks, just like a soda and water and stuff, was over $90. That was not a smart move. One, because we went into this, you start out your trip and you're like, oh, magic, everything else. And you immediately go into a crazy crowded environment, which not all of us are great with crowds in our family. I'm kind of more used to it than others. But also, too, you're not starting it out in the best way because you're walking and you're tired and you're like, oh, this is great. We're going to eat. And then that happens. And then you're kind of eating in an uncomfortable place. And then you're just like, get me out of here. So in hindsight, the move would have been to go to Blaze Pizza, which was again connected because this pizza at Napolini, not as good as Blaze Pizza. Pretty close, but not as good. And Blaze Pizza, as we learned later, we could have spent about $35. And I promise this is not an ad for Blaze Pizza. But just a reminder that while Disneyland is very convenient, you can easily walk over there. On a weekend night, downtown Disney is going to be nuts. If you're staying on site, it's very easy and convenient. But when you're doing that walk, I would say you may want to consider, especially on the arrival day, just hang out somewhere near your place. Or if we had picked up, Earl Sandwich wasn't that crowded. We could have picked up from there, taken it back to our hotel. Just something I had to remind myself. I've done this at Walt Disney World Disney Springs too. I don't really love that either. It's just too much for an arrival day where I think really, given the crowds, Memorial Day weekend and everything else, it would have made more sense for me for us to just get whatever. There's also places nearby. We even could have ordered and had something delivered to us. So that didn't start the trip on a great note, but we ultimately got back and we were okay. We got food. It wasn't like we couldn't find food, but wandered around downtown Disney. And really, that was really our only experience spending much time in downtown Disney. We went by some shops, saw the Lego store, Star Wars store, World Disney, everything else, but it was just too much. Too many people, very loud music, just not a great start for a kind of supposedly relaxing vacation. But with all of that said, we got back to the hotel. The walk's not bad. Got all settled in. Nice hotel. We're getting ready for our first day, which would be at Disneyland. I could not wait. So the park was open from 8 to 12. This was on Sunday, May 28th, and we did not arrive at 8. I would love to get there that early, but when you have 4 people and you're trying to not hard charge the trip, you have to understand that. But we still got there fairly early because we were adjusting to the time change, maybe a little after 9. So we walked in. I immediately pulled out the Genie Plus and chose Hyperspace Mountain for several hours later. And then we just kind of enjoyed seeing Main Street and everything else. And, right away you notice with Disneyland how much smaller it is. But that doesn't bother me. I like how intimate it feels. And I like the little touches like going to the fortune teller and using the Disney Play app and getting a fortune. My daughter enjoyed that. Little touches like that are always a cool part of Disneyland for sure. So my first thought was we want to hit some of the Fantasyland rides. But before we do that, let's just start off with something fun. So we went and did Buzz Lightyear's Astro Blasters, I believe is the Disneyland name. And it's basically the Florida one, but it's a little upgraded. It's kind of like version 2 in a way. I've also done the Paris version, which is kind of like version 3, I believe, because it opened later. But this one, the biggest benefit is you can take the guns and lift them off the vehicle, which means spinning or turning the vehicle is less important. Not zero importance, but a little less important. Somehow, even with that, I did terribly. I did not do well. I ended up with like 13,000 or something really low. And it was kind of embarrassing. I usually do a little better on that. But we had fun. We basically walked on, didn't use our Genie Plus. Planned to probably use it again at some point. But actually, this was the only time we rode Buzz Lightyear. Again, with 4 people, you don't do as many repeats, but we still had a blast doing it. So then we went into Fantasyland, and for the first time, I rode Snow White's Enchanted Wish. I appreciate the effects. I think there are some very cool effects. The attraction looks brighter. It doesn't feel like a dark ride that, was updated last with New Fantasyland, mostly in the 1980s. And it flows well. There's a lot going on there. And it still has some of the classic Snow White dark ride gags, like my favorite, where the queen is standing at the mirror and then turns and becomes the witch. It's a very simple trick, but I like it. Some other really nice tricks in there too. I will say I still appreciate kind of the darkness and weirdness of the prior Scary Adventures version. And I know this is nostalgia talking, and I never really say I loved it. But just in general, I feel like if they were looking to, one, remove the kind of rough edges and scary side, which I think they were, and also provide kind of a shine like they've done with Peter Pan and with Alice in Wonderland to add some new effects but still feel classic, then this did a very good job at that. Speaking of darkness and weirdness, we next went to Pinocchio, which I had ridden the version in Paris but hadn't ridden this version on past trips. And I will say this is a very strange ride. It's dark, it's strange. My daughters don't really remember the film that well, even though they have seen it. So for them, she was just like, what is that? What is even happening? And I explained the plot briefly. And I will say this dark ride really zones in on the last act of the movie. You have a little bit when you go in with I Got No Strings on Me, but most of it is the Pleasure Island and Monstro area. And it makes sense because that kind of fits with this old classic dark ride feeling, though this one actually was new to the revamp in the 80s of Fantasyland. I like this quite a bit. I like with all these dark rides, how they keep you separated because the rooms are so small. You don't see the other cars, so you feel like you're having your own experience rather than just kind of a bunch of cars and, like an aerial situation where you can see the other vehicles or Haunted Mansion or whatever. You are having your own experience. And some of these rooms, you really had a chance with the slow moving cars to get a good look at them. So I think Pinocchio is really cute. I love the fact that Disneyland in general just has so many dark rides in its Fantasyland area, and most of them do not have a long wait. We waited granted, it was still fairly early in the morning, but maybe 10 minutes for each of these and did not have the same level of waiting that we've had for other things. So we did do one more in the Fantasyland area at this point, which is Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Oh, Mr. Toad. Have to love it. I loved going on the version in Walt Disney World when I was younger growing up. One of our favorites for our family. We loved the fact that there were two sides to it and that it felt so big and was so strange and had so many fun moments. This version of Mr. Toad is not as long or as extensive because, of course, it came first and it was in a very small building, even though it was updated again in the 1980s. But still goes back to that original 1955 version. Having it feels like a treat because it's been gone from Florida for so long. Many people have never ridden the Florida version, and I loved it. And I couldn't, side by side compare it. I know this one is smaller, but I still think there's a lot of fun moments. I mean, the idea you get to go through and there's a tavern and then the judge is pointing at you and saying guilty, and of course the final portion with as our motor mania is out of control, then we are hit by the train apparently and go to hell. So I'm not telling you that, I'm saying that's where we go, and it's so strange. I love it. It's one of my favorite dark rides just because of that, and just because in general of just how strange and how fun and how odd it is. And definitely my favorite of the dark rides we did from Disneyland on this trip. And part of it, again, is nostalgia for Mr. Toad and the fact that it's gone from Florida, but also just the weirdness of it. I really miss how weird Disney World was growing up, and I was scared by a lot of it as a little kid. But just the examples of Mr. Toad and then the original Snow White and everything else, just a lot of strangeness, and it seemed almost designed to frighten kids. Pinocchio kind of feels that way too, especially younger kids. But I also appreciate just how small these are with the little queues where you go inside, which can feel a little claustrophobic, I will have to say. But just being able to kind of have that smaller feeling where the rides are just bam, bam, bam. You just hit all the rides so easy, they're not spread out, and that's a really big benefit of Disneyland. Next up was the Finding Nemo submarines, which I had never done before because the last time I went, the line was really long. And also going with family, it's different. And here's what I say about this. I love the fact that they were able to save the subs and still have them going back to, the new Tomorrowland. Even before that, the 1959 updates to Tomorrowland. And I will say that I appreciate the parts early on in this ride where, still having that cool vantage point where you're sitting there and it's a convincing effect that you're diving with bubbles and everything else and getting to see the underwater part. All that works great. Less exciting to me is the actual Nemo story. Some of these shots seemed exactly out of Finding Nemo from Epcot. Like the whole, we're going to the great blue world and everything. And then I made a joke to my daughter beforehand because I hadn't really followed what the plot of it and said, oh, Nemo probably gets lost again. And I thought, oh, well, no, they're going to do something different. Maybe it'll just be, Nemo and them talking about under the sea and everything else. Nope, he gets lost again. And so a lot of the scenes felt so familiar to the scenes in Finding Nemo in Florida. And granted, not everybody that goes to Disneyland goes to Florida. And this was better for me because of the other aspects of it, which is the submarine and being able to look through the portal and that whole experience of riding in the sub and all that. All that is great. A lot of the Nemo portions, I don't know. So overall, I think this is a good ride. I'm glad. I appreciate the fact the subs are there. And I'm so happy that they were able to save the subs and do something cool in Tomorrowland. You have the subs and you have the monorail right above. And you have the empty People Mover track. Disneyland's Tomorrowland, just as a quick side note, needs a lot of help. And granted, we did most of the things in Tomorrowland. We did Nemo. We did Buzz Lightyear. We did Space Mountain, which I'll talk about in a minute. But still, there's a lot of dead space there. Launch Bay has been closed for a while. I know they have the new lounge in there, but to most guests, and they're not using the theater that formerly held various productions, including Captain EO the last time I was here, and it's had sneak peeks and everything else. But there's just a lot of dead space, and we also did Autopia. And speaking of the issues, you see that like beat up People Mover / Rocket Rod's track. They got to do something. And I know many of us thought they were going to make an announcement, and there were some strong rumors at D23 Expo. They were going to make an announcement that they were going to update Tomorrowland. Still hasn't happened. I'm skeptical. I think at the Destination D23, we're going to hear about the Animal Kingdom. That's going to be the big updates we're going to hear about. Maybe something in Epcot. I don't think we're going to hear any updates about Tomorrowland at Disneyland, but it really needs help. And you can see it where people are just so crowded in Adventureland and New Orleans Square and Fantasyland. But beyond Hyperspace Mountain, Tomorrowland, not as crazy. And that's because people don't care as much about the attractions. But next up was Hyperspace Mountain. We were able to use our Genie Plus reservation. And while we were in line for that, I immediately booked Autopia, which was a quick turnaround and is right there. Hyperspace Mountain, I thought, good. I really like the lift hill with hyperspace. And just in general, I think Disneyland's Space Mountain, I love how intimate it feels and how it's smaller and how you feel like you're not in this grand open area. You feel a little claustrophobic and a little cramped, and you're going in circles and going in turns and everything else. And I think it's a little forceful. I feel like you really feel it more. My wife decided to try it, and she definitely felt it. But just in general, I think it's fun to do different things with Space Mountain. The onboard audio gives it a big check mark above Walt Disney World's version, and the ability to use the visual effects, which they don't have on the same level at Walt Disney World, is also a check. However, I find that the Disney World version feels a bit bigger. The hills and the straightaways and everything else, it feels grander, where here it does feel a bit small. So I think I'd give a slight edge to say Disneyland Space Mountain is a bit better. I know we did Hyperspace Mountain, but I have done the version normally, but it's not as big of a gap as you might think. Even though Disney World beats you up more, this is a much smoother ride than Disney World. If they could make updates and add onboard audio, or at least fix the track effects, do something, Disney World could easily be as good or almost as good as this one. And I love Space Mountain. First real roller coaster I ever went on when I was 8 years old, and have kind of never looked back, and still one of my favorites. And I would say that Hyperspace Mountain does a good job of incorporating Star Wars in a fun way and doesn't take too much away from the Space Mountain idea. I should mention earlier, before Nemo, we were going to do a quick ride on Star Tours because they had a 10-minute wait, and then it broke. And I just want to note each example of this, for it's what I talk about later at the end of kind of our days. Star Tours was broken. It did come back on later, and we did circle back to it, and that was something. So now that leads well into Autopia, which I will say the Autopia setup overall at Disneyland much better. You get to go through the woods. It's very cool. Nice setting. It's much longer. I kind of like the robot and the bird thing, though it always seems like Honda the robot is always just torturing the bird. During the queue, the bird voice is pretty obnoxious. In general, I think this ride on its own is better than Florida's Indy Speedway and feels more like you get to travel around. I like it much more. However, two things. First of all, a minor thing with the Lightning Lane is that maybe just because it was backed up, there were all these people lined up, and the standby and Lightning Lane were all just in one place. And we asked the person, we're like, wait, where's the Lightning Lane? Where do we go? There's just one line. And he's like, oh, just go around the people to the sign, and then you'll get through the Lightning Lane. And we're like, really? We feel like we're just kind of butting, and maybe some of those people in that line don't know, and they're in the Lightning Lane. He's like, oh, no, just go around the people, go to the sign. So then we went around the people, got to the sign, and there were people there that were like, hey, we're in the Lightning Lane too. And I was like, I don't know, the guy just told me to go here. So I think we inadvertently may have stepped in front of some people. I know this gets a little, and we were trying to line jump. And the second cast member said, yes, it's a bad system. Disney, fix the system with Lightning Lane at Autopia. I know this does not seem to be a high level, but it indicates to just a little more sloppiness with the setup in California. I think a lot of it has to do with not having as much space. In Florida, they have a lot more space, and Florida also seemed to plan better with Lightning Lane, and Disney seemed to be kind of thrown together a little more, even though I know they had paper fast pass. But just in general, I think with the lack of space, things seem to be a little more haphazard with the lines and all kind of over the map. That's a minor issue. The bigger challenge is Autopia cars just keep breaking. And I will say I found it very funny because the car in front of us, two cars in front of us kept braking, and you see the cast members come running out on the track, and they're just like hitting the gas pedal a bunch of times. Okay, that didn't work. Then they're just shaking the car, and that didn't work. Then they open the truck and close it, and that seemed to make it work. But then it broke again a little further, and we got to see a lot of it. My daughter's car behind us also had the same problem, but they fixed that by shaking the car. Disneyland, you need to refurb some of these cars. I know they eventually took the cars off the track, and they got different ones. It was kind of a mess, but entertaining just because we spent so much time on it. But if we were really in a hurry or if we didn't want to spend time just sitting on the car, we would have found this more annoying. But I will say just the funniness of them just shaking and hitting the cars and kind of doing the equivalent of unplugging and plugging them back in. Not a great ad for Honda. I will say Honda, the sponsor, not the best ad. And after that, we did It's a Small World. I don't mind the characters. There are a few spots that feel a bit much like Ariel sing It's a Small World that seem to kind of take you out of it. The more cacophonous kind of idea of Small World and everyone just kind of singing to you as you go. I felt like there were more people, there was more variations of just the It's a Small World versus another language. And I think, again, that has to do with the characters. I do love getting on in the outside. I think the exterior obviously makes this the best in that regard. And this one also having more connections to the original 1964 version is neat. I mean, though it's weird to say that given all the characters of being in there, still solid experience. I don't have any strong opinions about the characters for the most part. I've written this before. I did also like seeing several of the characters in wheelchairs to promote accessibility and just that side of it. Those updates are very cool, and I appreciate that Disney's doing things like that. One, to remember that there are many different types of guests, and we want to acknowledge all of them, especially when you have an attraction about the children of the world. So Small World, always great. It's a Genie Plus, and we did use Genie Plus, but it had like a 10-minute wait. So on most days, you can use it to save a little time, but it's not going to make a big difference. We did another fun thing, too, after this, where we were trying to kind of get away from the crowd a bit, and we were kind of heading more towards the Frontierland area and all of that, Rivers of America. So we decided to go to the Pirates Lair at Tom Sawyer Island, which I've been to Tom Sawyer Island, Florida, but not recently. I don't think I've ever been on Disneyland's variation, which, of course, was updated to the Pirates Lair in conjunction with Pirates 2. If you're curious to learn about that, go to my interview with Chris Runco, where he talks a lot about that. Very fun conversation in general. Chris is awesome. He's also the person who designed the Rex robot for Star Tours. What I loved about this is just having so much space because there were people there, and actually they have bathrooms in the old fort, which was not open, but there are individual bathrooms, which, wonderful. Just to say, the little things at Disneyland, it's not like you're really in a fort. It's amazing with the fort what they could do with the bathrooms. But just, I liked a lot of the pirate effects, especially in the cave. They did a good job, and I know they had very tight budget and limitations. But if you're looking, regardless if you have kids or not or anything, if you're looking to kind of get away from the crowd, I love the riverboats, more on that later, but this was another way. And also just getting on the raft, which goes about the equivalent, it looks like about 15 feet across the water. It's probably a little more, but our raft we got on, it wasn't crowded, got across, got back, very simple. We're able to spend, maybe 30 minutes or so on it. And did some of the shaky bridges and everything else. Just a fun way to get away and then still be in an area that had a lot of history in Disneyland. Next up, we went to the Tiki Room. And before that, of course, we wanted to get a Dole Whip and Tiki Juice Bar, which I remember being giant lines when I was there last. Mobile order, but that's all they do. This is a good tip for you. If you want a Dole Whip, just the basic pineapple, you can order from them, but you are going to have to do it well in advance, because when I saw it most of the time, it was an hour to 80-minute wait, and there's no line for that. It's all mobile order, and there really wasn't much of a mobile order line. I did see a lot of people kind of waiting for their window or waiting for something to be made, but we didn't even do that. We just went to Tropical Hideaway, which, very pleasant area right next to the Jungle Cruise, which also has food along with Dole Whips. That has no mobile order and draws quite a standby line, but it moves quickly. So we went there both days, and maybe waited. The first time was longer, maybe like 15 minutes. Second time might have been more like 10. And then they have a place where you order Dole Whip, and then you walk over and order food, and they have a seating area, though getting a table can be a challenge. We were able to get tables the second time. This time we were getting it more to eat in the tiki room, and I did the pineapple mango swirl, which was excellent. They also had a special strawberry float that my wife got that she really enjoyed. Then we also bought these little bao, which are not that filling, but kind of like an appetizer with various like meat inside. There's several different types. I think we got one with pork, if I remember, and that was very good too. And then we went to the tiki room, ended up eating most of our food before we got in, but you are able to bring any food and drink in there. So I ate the bao in there and saw the full show of the tiki room, which I love. And I also love the pre-show with the various gods. I really appreciate that they still do the original show again at Florida Since the Fire, but this one is longer and is super cool to see that version and to be able to bring in food. And if you could time it right, you can eat a Dole Whip inside the tiki room. We were a little slow on that one just because we ended up being the Dole Whip in the pre-show area. And the tiki room, very popular, essentially full. I mean, it doesn't really have a wait because it's big enough where everyone can get in there. But we got in, we had a good time, really enjoyed the tiki room with the longer show that I appreciate a lot. I've listened to that audio quite a bit. And amazingly, we came out, we got in front of a bunch of people because Jungle Cruise only had a 5-minute wait. It flipped up after that. It ended up being about 10, but it listed 5. Got on the Jungle Cruise, had a solid driver, not the best I've ever had. I appreciated the differences in Disneyland where you do the temple early on. Had a lot of the recent updates, but getting a chance to do the original Disneyland Jungle Cruise, classic. I still like the updates a lot. The piranha scene is fun as an addition with the little fish right next to us. Love the Jungle Cruise. I'm glad we got to do it without much wait because I know it can build up. But I have found the Jungle Cruise Disneyland. I noticed the wait not that strong for much of the day. It's a little different than Florida, where right now it's become one of the most popular Genie Plus reservations. They don't have it on Genie Plus in California, but the wait was never too long. That's interesting. I wonder how that impacts it. But just in general, always love the Jungle Cruise. And so next up, we kind of reached a point where we just couldn't seem to do anything. So we decided we had a Splash Mountain Genie Plus that I reserved right after Small World, and we were going to go do Winnie the Pooh first. And Winnie the Pooh, we get in line, like, okay, here we go, and then it broke. And there were people waiting because their kids had gotten on earlier and were stuck inside. And we got to the point where they were stuck and there was not going to open for a while. And we just left. Unfortunately, never ended up doing Winnie the Pooh because on the second day, we did not venture to that area at all. So the next thing worked, though. We did then do Splash Mountain, my final ride on Splash Mountain. And I know I mentioned this on the clip, but the water table level, I think, was too high. Because even on the big drop, didn't get that wet, but by that point, I mean, I was toast. I got soaked on all the small drops, from the very first one, which got on my shorts, to the next two, particularly the one that, like the Laughing Place one that goes down and then up. Water over my head, dumped on me. This was like Mystic River Falls at Silver Dollar City level, which is like the raft ride of soaking. And it was like 60-something degrees out. Normally, I think of Splash as not being something that gets you that wet. Now, I'll ask you all, was it different at Disneyland? I don't know. But I really appreciate, after we tried to ride it in Florida last year at spring break, got all the way into the queue, and then it broke and never came back. So I'm glad that this time went off without a hitch. It was very popular. We still waited quite a bit for a good 20 minutes for the Lightning Lane, but nothing compared to what people were waiting on Tuesday. I'll just say this about Splash Mountain. For years, I've called Walt Disney World Splash Mountain my favorite attraction. Now, I've said it always with kind of a grain of salt, or always with the caveat that it feels a bit weird to call an attraction based on Song of the South your favorite theme park attraction at Walt Disney World. Because, you can't completely separate it from the source material. Even if there's no Uncle Remus and a lot of the story has been pulled out, it still has those characters. So it always felt a bit strange. And the Disneyland version is also very good. It's a little shorter. I do like the single file log flume approach in general, though I think it does get you wetter, but it makes me feel more like kind of a classic log flume. But I'll say that in that I will miss the ride. I really love the ride, but I rode it many times, and I'm thrilled they're updating it for Princess and the Frog. I think they're going to put Disney knows how important this attraction is in terms of crowds and in terms of people's enjoyment. I think they're going to put their fullest foot forward in order to make it the best that it can. And I'll jump ahead and just say the amount of people that were there for Tuesday for that. I mean, the waits were 200 to 250 minutes most of the day. I saw Tony Baxter in the Indy queue, and it took me a while to realize, of course, Tony Baxter was there for the final ride. I saw pictures. Josh Shipley posted pictures, a former podcast guest, of him being there. I heard Robin Lopez, the NBA star, was there. A lot of fun, from what I heard. I heard people scooping out water in little canisters. That seems a little silly. But in general, I'm thrilled we got to ride it. And and it's also more memorable, especially for my daughters, because both me and my daughter, who were first and second in the car, got soaked. And of course, how it goes, there was a person behind us who went with the four of us who didn't get wet at all. And then my other daughter, Ed, and my wife, Erin, did not get that wet at all. But oh my gosh, I was so soaked. I had a jacket on, and the jacket was stuck to me. And it was pretty cold out. There was no drying. Bravo, Splash Mountain. I can't wait to see the next iteration of what's to come, and appreciate all the enjoyment I had on the ride, including this soaking over the years. One other thing we did right after that is Haunted Mansion, which I felt like I wasn't too soaked at that point. We also did Genie Plus. Haunted Mansion had maybe a 40-minute wait posted, but this was a pretty quick one. What can you say? It's a classic. Love Disneyland's Haunted Mansion. Glad I got to see the Hatbox Ghost right next to the right of our car. I think it's great. I think it's better than Florida. I think the stretching room, though it doesn't have the audio improvements of Florida, feels more intimate and just more believable. And just the fact that you get to walk by a few scenes that you ride by in Florida as you're walking to the cars, but it doesn't seem as crazy too, trying to get to that. And I mean, it's close. Florida Haunted Mansion's amazing too. But for me, the Disneyland one, the outside is very cool. Getting to walk in the front door like you do in Phantom Manor at Paris, but is a real treat. I love the old hitchhiking ghosts still being there. They're not taking off your head. It's not digital and really fake. So that's a super cool element. And also, we got stopped once. I think this probably was just for like an accessible rider or something. But we got stopped for several minutes, of course, backwards, looking up at the scary trees in a weird, uncomfortable position is, of course, where you get stuck. Nowhere else. Couldn't get stuck by the Hatbox Ghost or somewhere cool or in the graveyard or whatever. We get stuck going backwards, laying on our back. Just typical. But enjoyed Haunted Mansion. And then as we were doing that, we did not do Pirates. We're going to do that the next day. Instead, we went over and said, let's do the railroad. That should be fun. We haven't heard that. We get up to the railroad and they're doing maintenance. One of the trains had to have maintenance on the track, so it's also closed. Oh boy. Okay. Well, we were getting worn out by that point as it was, after 5 o'clock. So we were like, okay, let's go do Lincoln. And I love Great Moments of Mr. Lincoln. I think the newer version, Josh Shipley, again, talked about it on his podcast, working with Tony Baxter and others. Really cool. I love the pre-show. I love all of it. I think it's great that it still exists. There's a Disney 100 exhibit that was fine, not my favorite, but it was okay. My family didn't really care about it at all. I guess this is a reason we haven't done Hall of Presidents or American Adventure recently. But I love the fact that they incorporate Two Brothers. I also think it's cool they incorporate Golden Dreams at the end. The Lincoln animatronic looks awesome. It wasn't very crowded. I was, of course, still soaked. I could watch this show over and over. I know I'm in the minority about this. I think just growing up with attractions like this, especially American Adventure and Hall of Presidents, I really appreciate this type of attraction and show. And even having been to the Lincoln Library and seeing two great attractions there that are also top-notch theme park ones done by BRC, it's not that I particularly think that Lincoln is like the best president ever, my favorite. I just really like the history and the way this has been updated. So I'm glad we got to do it. And so getting the chance to do Lincoln before we left that day, I wanted to make sure we did it. It was one of the top priorities for me, including some of the things that we have yet to do that we are going to do on the second day. So before we left, we got a little more to eat, and then we decided, okay, we're going to go do Star Tours. Did not have to do Rise of Skywalker clips. Yes! We had Darth Vader. Both of our destinations were from the prequels, which you might say, oh, Dan, the prequels. No. This was good. This was good, including the broken out Death Star as it was being built. Um, cool stuff. I like it. I still love Star Tours. There wasn't much of a wait. We did use Genie Plus, but like I mentioned in the clip, 15-minute standby. We used Genie Plus. We had to wait 10 minutes. So really, I mean, because we waited till our time hit, but almost immediate. Love Star Tours. The adventure continues. Glad it's still there. Its placement at Tomorrowland, I think, is really good. So having it there and working and in a good spot, it's not as popular as it was because there's so much else going on. But just this park has quite a lot of Star Wars, and I'm fine with Star Tours being here and not in Galaxy's Edge. I think it stands on its own. Still a good part of Tomorrowland, and the variations of it make it fun. And I think it's still a little undervalued as a gem, particularly since they made the updates. And that did it for day one. In terms of food during the day, I don't have that much to add because we typically were just eating like counter service pickup, mobile order. The Stage Door Tavern doesn't have a lot, but is in a really good spot in Frontierland, just in terms of things like fries and other basics like that. That's a good spot to get from. We won't go there till Tuesday, but the Royal Veranda in New Orleans Square is a great spot for Mickey beignets and for the bread bowls. That's another cool spot. But really, we grab some stuff in Tomorrowland, which I know Tom Bricker says don't eat in Tomorrowland. Hey, what are you going to do? But just grab some lunch food and other foods as we went along. Like I said, we had the bao, which was very good, but didn't overdo it in that regard. But ended up having Blaze Pizza that night, which again, if you're staying at the Hyatt House or nearby and you're leaving the park, it's much cheaper and quick and good service, and that worked out great eating in our large room. But that ends day number one. We have 2 days to go. Next up was Disney California Adventure, which has improved a lot over the years in terms of things to offer. However, this still felt like how we would probably not be staying as late because there just wasn't a level of interest from my family members and even a little bit for me, though it's hard for me to turn down any ride, but from a lot of the carnival-esque ride. Like, do we really need to spend time doing jumping jellyfish or even Goofy Sky School? Are we completists in that regard, or should we just focus on the highlights? And there were some big things we hadn't done yet or that I hadn't even done. So I thought, let's focus on those. Of course, the first thing we did when I walked in, we arrived a little later, more like 10, is I reserved a lightning lane for Mission Breakout, which was really not that much later. I think it was like after 11, but it wasn't super late. So, but in order to take some time, since we had a bit of time, we went to the bakery tour, which is one of those rare elements of DCA 1.0. I had never been there, and they weren't showing the video they used to have with Rosie O'Donnell and Colin Mockery of Whose Line Is It Anyway, which I was interested to see. I'm sure it's out there on YouTube. I haven't really looked much, but you still get in there. They give you a free piece of bread, and you're able to see how Boudin is making the bread itself, and then buy some of that bread at the nearby Pacific Wharf Cafe, including a giant loaf of bread that looks like Mickey, which is a little weird. You get to eat the Mickey ice cream, but eating the big Mickey bread, you're like, I'll take the ear, and I'll take this. Was a little much, and it is gigantic. It's about $10, but huge. We also went to the Ghirardelli chocolate area. We've got a coffee with some chocolate. We will be going back there later because we didn't want to carry chocolate around all day. But that's all in that Pacific Wharf area, which is a really cute area. I hadn't spent time in there before, but I know it's being rethemed very soon to San Francisco. But, they have a little Chinese place. They have the Pacific Wharf Cafe that I mentioned. Lots of little stands, tons of seating. Though I will say there were plenty of places to sit that morning. But when we went back in the afternoon, that is a popular area for sitting because it's right in the middle of the park. It's an attractive area. And I don't suspect, we already saw some of the little changes they were doing for San Francisco. I don't expect there to be big changes. So I think they're putting in a meet and greet with Baymax. But just in general, it's a cute, cool area that I'm glad at least it's staying, even if it is being updated in a way. So we got to Mission Breakout. Hadn't done it before. Really impressed by the look. Even the building on the outside is really distinctive. Yes, it kind of stands out and doesn't really fit with what's around it. Of course, a lot of what's around it is that terrible Hollywoodland area with the horrible backdrop and just not much there. There's just not that much there. It's still kind of a mess right now, and I know they'll probably be making updates there at some point. It was nice to see the red trolley going up and down the street again, and just a lot going on. There was some nice life to it, but we went through Avengers Campus to get to Guardians and saw there was a Spider-Man show going on, which very cool with the Spider-Man animatronic. The person playing Spider-Man in the show was doing some cartwheels and stuff, but not that impressive, really. But later on, did see Spider-Man doing high fives with everyone and really getting into it, which I enjoyed a lot, where it was kind of the gee whiz, silly, oh, I'm awesome and I'm a teenager Spider-Man, which I thought was fun. But back to Mission Breakout. We did have a lightning lane, so we only spent a short time in the main room, which is impressive. And then you get into the former library area where the Rocket Raccoon animatronic, which hangs above you, very clever effect. I think they did a great job and having it seem like that you get such a good view of it. It's right in the room with you. And even grabbing the weapon at the end and everything else is nice. And I think sets up the ride very well. Benicio del Toro, the collector, is just hammering it up, and that's fun. Though Rocket Raccoon mutes him. But just in general, it felt a lot like Tower of Terror in that regard. And then, of course, just like in Tower, you think, okay, we're ready for the ride, and then you wait for a while in what was then the boiler room, and now it's kind of the collector's area. I had heard that this was a lot more raucous, because you think about Tower of Terror. What I like about it is kind of the slow burn aspect, especially in Florida, where you go up, and then there's the creepy room, and then you go up more, and then you go through the fifth dimension, and you start to get more and more nervous, and we're like, oh no, we're already here, and then you have the drop setup, which used to just be one drop, and then became two, and then became the sequences we know now. Well, it's essentially, I know that I've ridden the DCA tower, and it's quicker, and you do have those early rooms, but it moves faster, and before you know it, you're doing it, and everything else. And then we get to the third stage, which is Mission Breakout, which doesn't even have any build up, and is basically the build up is to get in. Once you get in, it's just like, here comes a song, and here come the drops. And it was a lot. Oh my gosh, I don't forget the exact title, but it's We Want the Funk, basically, probably Funkadelic. And so that was fun. And what I found interesting too is that you go up and down a lot. And my stomach was just like, okay, let's just chill for a moment. And I didn't find myself enjoying as much the big drop because you're just constantly going, bam, 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 bam. And even the Guardians, almost like they just make cameos. I mean, the door opens briefly and then you drop again or you shoot up or whatever. But, they're battling someone, but you don't see much of them really at all. And so it's more the vibe that they're conveying. But I will say, given the task that Joe Rohde and the other Imagineers had, the tight time frame they had to face, and the fact that you're incorporating an IP and having to get the vibe of that IP, they had a home run. I wouldn't say that my stomach loved it. Like, this was the only ride on our entire days, any of the days that we did, where I went, ooh, I could feel that. And they got a little nervous about my daughters. Now, granted, we didn't do that many super thrill rides, didn't do spinners and whatnot, but I will say that it got to me a little bit. So overall, I think this is a very solid ride. I don't know if it's my favorite ride in the park, but I thought it was well done. And so after that, we went on and we thought, one, we want to do something that Aaron can do, and two, just slow down a bit. So we used a lightning lane again. Monsters Inc. basically was able to get it very shortly. I got it while we were in the queue for Guardians, which is something that's always a good tip. We're able to ride it without a problem. Basically just, I think it's a okay dark ride. I think some of the figures look impressive. The door factory looks great. Some of the figures are a little more static, but in general, I think it's a solid mid-era type dark ride, which I know they expanded and did a lot more with in Tokyo. Kind of like how Winnie the Pooh got again expanded in Tokyo. But here it's good. There aren't a lot of rides like this at DCA. This and Mermaid kind of fit that bill where it's like they're popular and almost anyone can basically do them, but they're not like you must ride this every time you go. But I'm glad my family got to see this. After that, we went there was this massive Avengers store in that Hollywood area. And I'm sure that building is like a mixed-use building. You could use it for a lot of different things. I'm not 100% sure what that building has always been used for. But went in there. We didn't buy anything. But, they had like an Iron Man that was some ridiculous price and, things like that. Plus cheaper elements. But it was kind of a cool area, just big space. Would be nice, especially when it's hotter out, to go in an air-conditioned area. So we checked that out. Then we also walked into the animation academies. We didn't do the drawing or do Turtle Talk, but I like that idea of walking in with all the screens up there and having that go. And so we spent a little time there too. Next up was Little Mermaid. Little Mermaid does not have Lightning Lane access, and it actually had a very, very long line, but it moved so quickly. And so it took basically like 15, 20 minutes. I think the posted wait time was 20. And we were almost got out of line because the line looked so long. But once it got moving, it was easy. And I'll just say, still creepy. The animatronics are still creepy. The ride is fine. It's a little weird compared to Florida, where in Florida you have the big queue and entryway and everything else. And being that in California you don't have that because it's in the place that used to show Golden Dream and in the big theater space. And it feels kind of weird having Little Mermaid in there in that way. But overall, I mean, it's the same ride exactly. And I know they made some updates for lighting and everything else. But we stopped at the Kiss the Girl scene, and animatronics still creepy. I will say several minutes in front of that, especially at the end when they're waving. But I think it's a solid ride. I think given that it's a book report and everything else, but just in general, there are scenes that work very well. The Ursula animatronic is excellent. The Under the Sea scene is excellent. It's just certain parts of it just have those dead eyes look a little too much. But again, I'm glad this is here. This park needs more rides like this that everyone can do, like this and Monsters, and, done to the modern sense. But I would love if they had a bit more attractions like this just that are available to everyone and less carnival-esque things, which I know they've been moving away from the carnival attractions for a long time. And then we had a lightning lane for web slingers, which I had never done before. So this was a big one for me. I think that it fits well inside Avengers Campus. They need a super headliner attraction. This is a headliner attraction. We have this in Guardians. If you had a third attraction there, when you add in all the shows and characters and everything, this would be an incredible land. Instead, I think the land is good. I really like what they do with the characters, but I think they need something else. It's always going to be a little weird to me to have a Spider-Man attraction, given that Universal's Island of Adventure has such a classic Spider-Man attraction. I know that's more themed to the comic books or even the cartoons from the 90s and everything else. And this is the MCU Spider-Man. But I think there's more they could have done here than having Spider-Man and Spider-Bots. That seemed a little lazy to me. The ride system, is fine. It reminds me a lot of the vehicles for Transformers and Spider-Man, actually, even though it's not the exact same setup. It still reminds me of those in a lot of ways. The big draw of this is the gaming and is the ability to use your hand and shoot webs, which I admit is super fun. I think I like this more than some who kind of were disappointed because the attraction itself is very, like I said, very Justice League-esque in terms of, or even Transformers-esque in a way, though that is not interactive or Spider-Man originally. But you get to do interactive things, and shooting the webs is cool, and there's a lot you can do from that. They could have done more with the actual things we're seeing on the screen. It seems like a ride, kind of a throwback ride a bit from 7, 8, 10 years ago. But being able to shoot the webs, it kind of hurts your arms, but it's also you get done. And then the team gaming aspect where you're all working together to try and get a score for your car. I like that idea too, where you are competing on your own, but it's not completely that way. So that makes it extra fun. I found the pre-show to be fine. I found the setup to be fine. Even the outside is fine. They had a huge backup with Lightning Lane, so I think they may be giving up too many of those. I also think there's a little more pressure as it being the newer ride versus if they added the other new ride they're talking about. This one would kind of settle in like Smuggler's Run at Disneyland has, and where it's a pretty easy get both from Lightning Lane and from Standby. It wasn't hard with Lightning Lane to get at all. I think this is a solid addition, good ride from Disney. I think you can easily go, well, what might have been, but on its own, it's a good B+ attraction to me. And we were really blitzing through the hits. We did stop and eat some food at Pacific Wharf once again during this time, and love that area, Pacific Wharf Cafe. And again, we got a cool burrito, but went right on to Cars Land to Radiator Springs Racers. And we bought an individual Lightning Lane because the wait was set at 90 minutes and we wanted to ride together. I know we could have probably got a 30-minute wait or something, a 20-minute wait with single rider. but paid the money. I think it was $18 for that. And I had always planned to pay for this one because I wanted to make sure we did it. We did not end up paying for Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway because we just did that last year at Hollywood Studios. But this is a classic and one that we all needed to do. And I thought it was great. I think the areas in Radiator Springs are really cool. It's easy to focus on the race part, but to me, some of the other sections, you go past the waterfall, and then some of the animatronics are excellent. And the way they split you in half and take, we went and I think our car got painted, which is kind of a nice effect. Very Test Track-esque, though obviously it was a little newer, though it did come out around the same time as Test Track 2.0. But from the inside where you speed up and slow down and you're kind of feeling like it's like nighttime and everything else. And this really has best attraction in the park for me right now. It might be different if sort of a California was playing, but also the Radiator Springs area with the rock work is super awesome. And just the scale of an area, making it look so cool where it's kind of a smaller area and then you walk in like through a smaller entrance and it's huge. It's very impressive. I wish we could have been there at night. We weren't there at night. But I like it. I also like that it's not nearly as fast as Test Track, but has some nice moves like the up and down hills there. Get you a little bit of excitement there. Not tons of airtime, but a little bit. But for the most part, this is a great mix of theming, thrills, Disney fun, dark ride elements, all the different things. Plus our car won, so we were the winners. Yay for us. Love Radiator Springs Racers. Later on, we then went on and we went to the Redwood Creek Trail. Oh, I like that area. I hadn't really been there before. My daughter Etta did a zip line. I was unfortunately way too tall and old for it on a tire swing. Kind of slammed in too, and that was fun. We just walked around mostly, saw the area, went across a lot of bridges. This is kind of the Tom Sawyer Island or Pirate's Lair, if you will, of DCA. They could do a little more with it, but I think it's cute and fun and great for smaller kids, but also just a nice additional area. I wish that parks kind of had more variations where it's not just ride, show, and that's it. Having something like this is always a great addition to a park and spreads it out for you. And especially being right next to the Grand Californian, it's a nice extension of the Grand Californian. And that's also true of our next attraction, Soarin' Around the World, which we use a lightning lane for that too. Didn't have to book it much in advance. You're sensing a pattern here. There were so many people at DCA on this day. It was crazy packed. But in terms of the lines, and this was not a grad night. Grad nights were actually the day before and after we were there, which was by design. But I do think that impacted Disneyland's traffic because people could hop. It was very easy to get lightning lanes for whatever we wanted. And even after we did not do Toy Story Mania and Goofy Sky School, we could have done them if we stayed for longer, like I mentioned earlier. But in general, Southern California, I think this has so much of a better queue and space with the big room, with the history of flight. And we didn't spend that much time in it. This lightning lane was one of the ones that went very quickly and did not have a big backup, despite the fact that I think the wait was 50 or 60 minutes for standby. But I think the redo of this area to Grizzly Peak from before when it was Condor Flats has been great and really fits well with the area with everything around Grizzly River Run, Redwood Creek, and the Grand Californian. And the ride itself, we did see the bendy Eiffel Tower. We also, there's some bad CGI, at least from my opinion. Taj Mahal looks really fake. The elephants look really fake. But I will say in general, I still think this is an excellent attraction. I'm glad it's there. I just wish it was the California version. I'm biased. Sorry, I don't believe people that say they think Sword Around the World's better. I feel like if they think that, they haven't ridden California lately. They haven't done them side by side because I feel like regardless of what you say about California being older and not having the same transitions, emotionally it's so much more powerful. And the music, Bruce Broughton's amazing, but the original Jerry Goldsmith score, I'm sorry, it's just classic. And still love Soarin'. We'll do it every time I try to go to the parks. We closed it out with Grizzly River Run, which sun finally came out early evening. We got a lightning lane. The wait was only 30 minutes, but we were able to bypass it because of the lightning lane. We only waited a few. I just love the idea of you get on these rafts with people you don't know and everyone has the same goal. You want to get a little wet. You want to have fun, but you don't want to be the person that gets soaked to the bone like I was on Splash Mountain. This time we avoided it. But again, I barely avoided it because I was going almost backwards several times and the guy next to me got it. But nothing was on the level of Mystic River Falls. I like this ride a lot. I think it fits perfectly in the whole setting and the theming and everything else. The Grizzly Peak is huge, much bigger than I remember it being, with the big waterfall and everything else you can see from all over the park. Glad my girls got to do it because they really wanted to, even though they were a little worried about getting wet. They enjoyed it a lot. The rapids are so much fun. It has a bit of thrills with the hills, but it's nothing severe. It's just a fun ride in a cool natural setting. And even when it was cold out, we didn't get that wet. Etta got wetter. She barely got any wet at all in Splash Mountain. Be careful what you wish for. But just overall, we had a blast doing this. And I mentioned on the clip about getting stuck at the top of the hill. That was really fun. But just everybody in our raft had the right attitude, was having fun. You spend a few minutes, you get to interact with other people. Raft rides, when they're done well, are a blast. So that concludes our day at California Adventure. Like I said, there's a lot of things we didn't do. We didn't do Toy Story Mania. We've done that a lot. So there's a few things. We didn't really hit the carnival area, and we didn't do Incredicoaster, which that's something I wanted to do, but I knew I'd be riding it solo. And that's one of those things where even though my daughters have gotten bolder with roller coasters, they weren't ready for that. Even though the loop really isn't too rough, and it's really not much of a coaster in terms of super G-forces, it was a little too much for them. So I didn't push it. I've ridden California Screamin'. I figured at some point I'll do it. It's not going anywhere. This was good for a day because we went to the pool at the Hyatt House at night, relaxed, had Blaze Pizza again, very convenient. And I really should have had them sponsor this episode. But just in general, we had a good time and got ready for our final day at Disneyland. So for our final day, and this is going to be a record for the longest Tomorrow Society podcast, I could have made it 2 parts, but I still have to talk about Universal. So if you've made it this far, thank you for coming this far. And now you get to hear about our final day at the parks here. And we went back to Disneyland, and this time we had a more limited collection of rides we wanted to make sure we did. We spent more time wandering around, especially using Galaxy's Edge, meeting characters, getting the chance to use the data pad, especially for Elise. And so we didn't do as many attractions this time, but I think it worked out well for the third day as we were all starting to wear out a little bit. We didn't arrive till about 10:30. When I arrived, I immediately reserved an Indiana Jones Lightning Lane, which actually was already 7 p.m. This day was especially busy. Regardless of what the touring plan's calendar says, there were so many people in the walkways, and I think it's because it was the last day of Splash Mountain. So I already talked about Splash, but that brought so many people, especially to the New Orleans Square Critter Country area. Whoo, that was a lot. So first thing we did when we got in was went on the railroad. I wanted to make sure we did that, especially to see the Grand Canyon area and Primeval Diorama. Awesome. What can I say about the railroad? I love the area with the bridge near Galaxy's Edge. But just in general, I think it's so cool that they put in. I know it's been in for a really long time. First the Grand Canyon area, and then the Primeval Diorama relating back to the Magic Skyway from the 1964 World's Fair. I mentioned Mr. Lincoln, also another, and Small World. So many cool connections to the 64 World's Fair. Sorry about Carousel Progress, unfortunately. But in general, the railroad running is always something that I want to do every time I go to any park that has a railroad, but they tend to often be closed, like Silver City, like Six Flags Great America, like Six Flags St. Louis. So getting the chance to actually ride it, including the fact that the one was also closed last year at Walt Disney World, it's been a while. I like the way you sit sideways so you can be ready for the big finish. But just overall, you got some really cool views. I love that it provides a view inside Splash Mountain, which was nice for the final day to get a chance to look inside that. But the real draw is, of course, getting on at Tomorrowland and riding past so much history, such a fun area, and got a video of the whole thing that I'm sure I'll put up on YouTube at some point. But not the whole railroad, the whole part there with the 2 scenes. Very cool. And then we went and we got some Mickey beignets from Royal Veranda, from Royal Street Veranda, and those were great. And because the Mid-Jewel bars closed, that was the quick service place that was selling them. And then we went and waited in line for Pirates, which was a long wait. It only took about 20, but the amount of people, that was a lot of people. And love Pirates. Best Pirates of the Caribbean that I've done. I think even better than Paris, though I think Paris has some really cool variations. Never done the one in Shanghai. Florida one is solid and I always enjoy it, but I love the slow build up, and the first half of the Disneyland one is classic. Just classic. With the cave goes so slowly, you get the two drops, you have the bayou, you go by the blue bayou, and then I do like the scene near the end with the two guys shooting at each other. Last time I was at Disneyland, I got stuck there for a really long time. Felt like I was shot many times by those people, though they're not very good shots. They seem to be kind of all off. But what can you say about Pirates? It's much better than Walt Disney World. Do not sleep on it if you haven't been to Disneyland. It should be a top priority. It does not have Genie Plus, but there's a lot of differences even in terms of how you start and go down and then ultimately come up at the end. Also did the Columbia. Love the riverboats. Love, 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 love them. Wish we could have done Mark Twain. Love that there are two that are going through the rivers of America. So many cool views. Splash Mountain, Pirate's Lair, Tom Sawyer Island, some other figures of animals or Native Americans or everything else. It's one of my favorite things that they have at Disneyland. I love that the Rivers of America is so cool and just wonderful. That's all I can say. I love the open air aspect of the Columbia. And also it's cool to be able to go down to the deck. They have kind of this sleeping quarters and everything else. You know, of course, the Columbia is a replica of the ship that was the first flying the U.S. colors to sail around the world. If I was someone who could go to these parks more often, I think the rides I would do the most, beyond like your Pirates Haunted Mansion and everything else, would be the Mark Twain and the Columbia and the Railroad. So that was why it was really fun to be able to do things like that on this trip and to continue to kind of check out those aspects of the parks. Spent a lot of time at Galaxy's Edge. We did see the Mandalorian and Grogu multiple times being mobbed by people. Also saw Boba Fett. Kylo Ren was having some fun walking around with the Stormtroopers. Lots of characters. I feel like we're still not at the level we need to be, like Avengers Campus, but we're getting there. It's a lot further than Florida. I know Florida now has Mando, but did end up spending a lot of time walking around the marketplace. Oh, and I tried green milk, and it was disgusting. Blue milk I had in 2019 when I was there solo, and I thought it was pretty good. Green milk was gross. And to add to it, while I was waiting in line to spend $8 more on green milk, I got stung by a bee. So that was fun, where I was just standing there and I went, oh, that kind of hurt. And I looked down and there's a bee on the ground, like, oh. Luckily, my finger did not swell up, which happened several times when I used to work at the St. Louis Zoo. But got stung by a bee, had green milk that I could barely finish, got brain freeze when it was cold. Thumbs down on all that, but lots of great stuff in Galaxy's Edge. Still, Smuggler's Run, like I mentioned, we did Single Rider, Where's the Engineers. Still always impressed by when you get into Smuggler's Run, which I've done quite a few times, I really like just the look of it. Doesn't hold up as well on YouTube. And then the queue, even the part when you do Single Rider, you miss most of it, but the Falcon area and the walkthrough area, all just top notch. I respect the ride more the more times I do it, though I do wish there were multiple variations, more differences. That was what would lift the ride up a lot. We spent a little time at Toontown. We went through Mickey's house. I was wearing my Potato Land shirt, which I'd gotten. Mickey did raise his arms up, and he was excited about that. This is not a talking Mickey like they used to have in Florida. That house is well done, and also the wait wasn't very long. Got in there, got a picture, one of our few character greetings, so we got that on PhotoPass. So we did that. Saw the new Toontown, which does have a lot of grassy areas, and I think it's nice. It still was nuts there. We did not go on the little roller coaster there, the Gadgets Go. I think it may have changed the name because the wait was like super long. Did do Roger Rabbit, which I had never done before. I don't know. I love dark rides. I like weird dark rides. I like zany dark rides. That fits everything with Roger Rabbit. But I do think the spinning aspect, it feels a little more forceful because it's designed to spin. If you don't really want to spin, you find yourself just trying to make sure you don't spin. But I do think that I'm glad it's still there. I think it's fun, and I appreciate that Disney has just so many rides at Disneyland. They didn't take it out. They had an opportunity. They didn't replace it with, take it out and put in Runaway Railway or anything else. They have both. That's great. More things to do, more characters. It's all a plus. We didn't get to meet Pete because Pete apparently is not of his own space. He's just a wandering character, which is great because in general, Disneyland's wandering characters are so cool We saw so many of them wandering everywhere, especially at the main Disneyland park, especially in Fantasyland. So many characters, which is awesome. Did not meet them. Another thing, Storybook Land. Let's chalk another one up to being broken. We waited in line for a really long time because one of the boats broke and they had to remove it, and it took them a long time. Again, great job by the employees. Just took a while and was broken. Around this time, I checked, and just to give you an idea of this day, Big Thunder was closed for most of the day. Indy was closed for most of the day. Storybook Land was closed. Rise Resistance was closed for a lot of the day. Minnie and Minnie's was closed. Mickey and Minnie's was closed. One point, Alice in Wonderland was closed. When you look at the app and you see like 5, 6, 7 things closed, that's a really bad look. But we went on and we did do Rise of the Resistance and had a blast doing it. Still, Kylo Ren B mode. But thankfully, Lieutenant Beck got out alive. But I don't have that much more to add from last year. I appreciate the ride, especially when it works well. It's weird that Galaxy's Edge is like flipped backwards. Where in Florida, the first time you walk in, you're close to Rise of the Resistance. Where here you walk in from the back and you're far away from it. So everything seems to be in the wrong place. Kept getting confused and walking the wrong way just by the way it's laid out. But it's cool having such a popular land in Disneyland because, like I said, with all these people going for Splash Mountain, Galaxy's Edge was not empty, but the emptiest I've ever seen it. Like, it was very easy to walk up and get a picture in front of the Falcon, which has not always been the case. Part of this just might be it's been open longer, but also I think a lot else is going on. Quickly going to mention the castle walkthrough, which we also did, which I think is, I love the fact that you can walk through the castle. I wish there was some way to do it in Florida. Some nice images from Sleeping Beauty in there. Thumbs up for that, just with another cool way to show an attraction. You know, in Paris, they have the dragon beneath the castle, which is cool. But here, just having the walkthrough, I love all these little aspects of Disneyland that they have. Even Snow White's Grotto is right there. Just many smaller places and little attractions that you can do. We didn't do Casey Jr., but I mentioned Storybook Land. Just a lot of attractions of different types that everyone could do. Well, thankfully, Big Thunder did open. We were able to do Big Thunder in the evening, not when it was dark, unfortunately, but love the effects on the third lift hill. Still just a classic attraction. Etta loved it so much. I love the idea, too, of like lift hill, bit of thrills, break. Lift hill, thrills, break. It sets it off really well and makes it so fun because you never feel like you're being pummeled. You get to have a little bit of fun, and then it stops. So now we got to our final attraction, Indiana Jones. In theory, we had a lightning lane. All day we held on to it, and we were getting ready to leave. I was just going to say, forget it. We'll just use it for something else. But no, it opened. Yay! It opened. We got in line. We were so excited. We went through the queue. We got in the pre-show. The line was moving kind of slowly. We saw the pre-show many, many, many times. Got into a hallway and then stood there and didn't move for a long time. That's when I saw, oh, it's been closed, because I saw on the app. No one said a word to us. Didn't really hear anything. Just stood there for a while. Finally, people in front of us started cheering because they could see where people were getting loaded in the cars. We finally get out of that tunnel after a good 20 minutes in the tunnel. And granted, we had a lightning lane. At that point, we were probably an hour in. They have the weird thing where you go up the stairs, go around, and come back down. Went up the stairs, went around, came back down. 2 cars away, we noticed that they're unloading everyone and not loading anyone. Uh-oh, this is not good. No one says anything. They just go through it. They're cycling things empty. Then it stops. You get this weird announcement from Sala that doesn't really tell you anything. Finally, we're standing there for a while. I go ask an employee, I say, well, what's the story? We've been in this line for like an hour and a half. And she just said, we can't really tell you anything. We don't know how long. I would suggest staying in line for 5 more minutes, wink, wink. And if people leave, we're going to scan, which didn't mean anything for me because this was going to be our last attraction. So about 5 minutes later, they decide they're going to close. They send everybody out of the queue. And you're talking a queue of a lot of people. A lot of people. And so we all go out of the queue, and there's this giant line of people to scan to get another fast pass because we're ready, or lightning lane. Because remember, we had already gotten in, used our lightning lane. Everyone else had not, but they were going to, in a nice way, give them something. And anytime, come back one, but we just skipped it. My biggest thought here is it's not as much about Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is a great ride. There's 2 takeaways. One, I don't know if it's the cast members themselves or Disney's approach. The communication is just terrible. They don't tell you what's happening. You're just standing there not knowing what's going on. At Storybook Land, they told one person, and we kind of overheard. And it's just bad. And those automated announcements, they don't tell you anything. Disney needs, I know when you're further back in the line, you may not be able to find it, but they need to find a better way to communicate. And I overheard people say this is the third time or the fifth time it happened where you get in a line that you don't get to ride. So that's one part of it. The bigger part of it is they have a really big problem. Let me be clear. I had a great trip. We had such a good time. I'm so glad I got to go. I appreciate so much that we have the resources and the health and everything, we're able to go. But if I want to nitpick, I have to say the downtime on attractions at Disneyland is really bad. And I know it's a problem in Florida. We had some issues there. Nothing like this. Tons of things broken. Things breaking consistently when we were in line and no information. And I know they're refurbing. Indy just came off a big refurb. They're refurbing dark rides. They're doing it. I don't know if this is a refurb issue or if this is a overall operations process issue. People are spending so much money. I know we'll be back. A lot of people might never be back. Some people would have come back and maybe didn't have a great experience. Some people might consider it. It's just such bad show to have things break constantly. And I know theme parks, they're old. They run attractions. Things break. It happens. Getting evacuated happens. But right now, it seems to be worse. Like you see, I'll watch live streams of Florida, and the people mover constantly breaks and people get evacuated. These parks have so many people come to them and such capacity, they don't have extra capacity just sitting around. And when attractions are broken, like when Indy is broken all day, when Big Thunder is broken most of the day, and then they start and they break, and they start and they break, there's two elements. One is that people don't have as much to do, so it puts a weight on everything else. Two is that people aren't getting the value they paid for, which is very significant. And three, the service level is not what Disney is known for, being a place where things work, and things not working as well. It's a problem that they really need to focus on as soon as possible. Overall, in terms of Disneyland, I feel like it was great. I can't wait to go back. I love certain aspects, the way Genie Plus works, the way you can do so many attractions, the history of the park. I would love to do a tour there at some point. And just the volume of attractions, especially at the Disneyland park, the proximity to hotels and to the two parks is incredible. So many cool things we did. I don't have a lot of regrets, except for maybe a few things about touring. I wish we could have stayed a little later, but also the downtown Disney issue. But overall, I feel like things worked out great. Comparing it to Disney World, I will say that it's easy to say Disney World's the best because it's big and there's so many parks and so many hotels and everything else and space and everything. Or you can say Disneyland's the best because they have so many attractions, you can do so much, and it's got all this Walt history and everything else. I don't take either approach. I feel like they're different. Things I love about Walt Disney World, the scale, the different parks, the variations of attractions, the ability to stay at this really cool resorts, the size, the scope, what they've accomplished. It's different. But then at Disneyland, what I love is the opposite. I love the fact that everything is so close, that it looks so cool. Like Rolly Crump says, Disneyland hugs you. It's like a salad. Everything's together. Disneyland is such a unique place with so many unique areas that it's never going to be duplicated. So both resorts have their own draw. I'm glad we get to see both sides of it. I think Disneyland is somewhere you should, if you're a big Disney fan and just go to World all the time, you owe it to yourself to make the trip. I'm not saying you're going to think it's better, but there are a lot of attractions that are different. There are a lot of attractions that might be the same name but aren't the same. And there's just a lot going for it at Disneyland. So 3 days was enough time to see everything on the resort. I would have loved a fourth day just to relax a bit more and re-ride more things. With a family, you're trying to do so much, especially when people haven't ridden a lot of things and we didn't get back and re-ride much. I would love to do that, also try out some different foods, everything else. But I don't have any major regrets. I'm especially coming off the pandemic and the severe restrictions. I'm just happy to be able to enjoy the park more as it was intended or as it is intended and enjoy it. I will say it's a very expensive trip. I think food is a little more expensive in California, though not a lot more. And then you add in things like Magic Band Plus and everything else. It seemed to be a little harder to not spend as much there, but we did our best and still had an amazing time. I think I'm good talking about Disneyland. I am going to do another episode talking about Universal Hollywood. I'll also briefly mention a few things we did on the way. We didn't do much, where we stayed, all of that. And it will not be this long. It'll be more like a normal length trip report. That'll be the next episode. Before ending this big episode 200, I just want to say a few quick things. I want to say thank you so much to all of you for being a part of this journey, doing the Tomorrow Society podcast. I really appreciate any of you who've ever listened, but two, who've ever left a comment, who've ever sent me a note on email. Any of you who found any way to help support the show or to say that you like what I'm doing, you're awesome. When you're doing any creative endeavor, there are points where you're like, wait, why am I doing this? And what keeps me engaged as much as anything is when I hear from one of you. That all helps a lot because then it makes me think, okay, there is a reason I'm doing this. So in the meantime, I'm going to keep plugging away. It was very fun to get to Disneyland. I know I've talked a long time about it, but I just wanted to say again, thank you so much for being around and helping. I'd love to hear what you think of this show. If you want to shoot me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Always appreciate reviews on Apple Podcasts. The most recent one that I got was from H. Pint Wentz or H. Pint Wentz, not sure, who said that this is a great way to record these people's stories for posterity. That's one of the reasons I want to keep doing it. Seem to enjoy it. Thank you so much for that review. That was very kind. Of course, you can always support the show through Patreon, patreon.com/Tomorrow Society. If you want to make a one-time contribution, buy me a Dole Whip. I had a few of those on the trip. Go to tomorrowsociety.com/Dole Whip. You can connect with me on social media, Facebook, Instagram. Those are both at Tomorrow Society. Twitter's at TomorrowSOC. There's also the YouTube channel, Tomorrow Society Podcast. Just look for that. We're going to have some post some videos about Disneyland for sure. The music you're hearing is written by Adam Hookey, performed by the Sophisticated Babies. I produce, edit, host the show, do everything. Hope you enjoy it. Always love hearing from you. Thank you so much as we finish up this episode 200. Next time, I will be talking about Super Nintendo World, the studio tour, everything with Universal Studios Hollywood. Hope you enjoyed this show. Get ready for even more trip reports coming up soon. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you again very soon.